I grew up in a small Midwest town, surrounded by endless fields and a close-knit community. My childhood was a mix of ordinary days and extraordinary dreams. My parents, though not wealthy, instilled in me a sense of ambition and discipline. My dad was a veteran who shared stories of resilience, and my mom was a nurturing force who held our family together. High school was where I began shaping my identity. I excelled in math and science, dreaming of becoming an engineer. My best friend Jace and I spent countless hours sketching out imaginary machines and planning our futures. He was the bold one, always pushing boundaries, while I preferred the safety of clear rules and steady goals. After graduation, life took us in unexpected directions. Jace joined the military while I pursued engineering in college, but financial challenges and youthful mistakes led me to a crossroads, and I found myself enlisting as well. The Army became a crucible, forging me into someone stronger but also more guarded. By the time I returned home, I was a changed man. The innocence of my youth had been replaced by the weight of experience. I channeled my energy into education, eventually securing a job at GM where I met Sally. She was a light in my life, someone who brought color to the grayness that had settled over me. Together we built a life, a family, and a home, something I thought was unshakable. Awareness seeped back into me gradually, as though I were emerging from a thick fog. The dim glow of the basement workshop, filtering through the gap in the door, seemed to mirror my mood. Beyond the wooden divider, a racket sat firmly clamped in its vise, a remnant of my earlier work session. I could hear our youngest two kids playing and the Disney movie they were watching in the rec room. Sitting in my old chair, I glanced at the clock. I'd been there for over half an hour, lost in thought, trying to block out whatever I didn't want to hear. Dinner was done. Sally cleaned up while I headed to the basement to reglue some rackets for the fall racquetball leagues. I'd been playing for years, usually in the A bracket, and I took pride in my skills and fitness. At 6'2" and about 200 pounds, I kept in good shape despite the demands of my engineering job at GM. Our 7-year-old daughter, Jessie, followed me down to watch a movie with her younger sister, Allie. At this age, Allie always tagged along with Jessie. I couldn't help but wonder how things would change as Jessie grew up. Our 9-year-old son, Jason, was the oldest and usually retreated to his room to build model airplanes. I finished the handles on my 3 rackets and pulled the strings tighter, preparing for a potential mid-game break. Checking on the girls, I saw they were absorbed in Lady and the Tramp, so I decided to head upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I overheard Sally talking on the phone. I briefly considered surprising her, setting the mood for later, even though we'd already shared some time together that morning. But when I peeked through the door, I heard Sally giggling. I froze. That laugh was different. Familiar, but unsettling. Then I heard her whisper, "Sure would like to try that thing again before the wart comes off." That strange comment triggered a memory from a conversation I'd had in a bar a couple of months ago. I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed on the basement stairs, shutting the door behind me. Sally continued laughing, her voice dropping lower. I could catch only a few words. "Last time I was really on a roll. I can't wait." I didn't want her to know I was there, so I quietly retreated to my workshop, reflecting on the conversation. It reminded me of a night after a racquetball match when I had been at the bar with John and Craig. After discussing the game, the conversation shifted to women. I noticed that John and Craig seemed unusually interested in my marriage. Though they weren't trying to flirt, their probing questions made me uncomfortable, and I'd left early a few times to avoid the topic. That night, Craig was teasing John about his wife Mary, insisting he get a personal surgery. I assumed it was a vasectomy and mentioned that Sally had talked about having me get one, but we hadn't agreed yet. Craig kept smirking while John looked distressed. "Oh no, she wants him to remove the wart," Craig said, laughing. I was confused. "What's going on?" I asked. John blushed and explained he had a wart in a private spot. He'd seen it grow over the years, and now Mary wanted it removed. John wasn't so much concerned about the money as he was about losing his advantage in attracting other women, as the wart seemed to be a topic of interest. Realizing I wasn't comfortable with their conversation, I decided to leave. Now, sitting in the dark, I couldn't believe Sally could be involved in something like what her phone call suggested. Sally knew John and Craig from racquetball, but I didn't think they'd ever met her. The pieces started connecting, and I couldn't ignore the possibility that something was going on. Sweating, I hoped there was a logical explanation, but Debbie, Sally's boss, was clearly involved. Debbie had been with the company for 5 years and had become a close friend to Sally. They'd bonded when both were pregnant, and over time their families socialized a few times, though we were never close. John and Craig had joined the Wise Racquetball League a couple of years ago. Despite similar family situations, we only socialized at games or afterward over beers, never with our families. It wasn't until recently, when I mentioned the store where Sally worked, that I learned Debbie was an acquaintance of John and Craig. They had attended the same high school, and John mentioned they saw each other a couple of times a year. About 2 years ago, when Allie was in the midst of the terrible twos, Sally had been struggling. Jessie went to daycare, and I was working extra hours. One night, Sally broke down from exhaustion, and after comforting her, I offered to take full responsibility for the kids on her next day off so she could get a break. She thanked me and said she'd think about it. A couple of weeks later, Sally said she'd talk to Debbie about needing a break. Debbie suggested a shopping trip to upscale malls in Detroit. Though I had reservations, I agreed. Sally and Debbie left on a Saturday morning, checked into a motel, had dinner, and saw a movie. I insisted on getting the hotel info, which she provided. The next day, they checked out, went to another mall, and returned home by 5 p.m. Sally was grateful for the trip and hugged me when she got home, sharing all the details. She hadn't gone overboard shopping, but bought a few nice things for herself and the kids. I was glad she had a good time, and the kids were well behaved, so I had no complaints. Over 2 years ago, after Sally's first shopping trip with Debbie, it became a regular thing. Every few months, they'd leave Saturday morning and return late Sunday. I didn't mind much. I enjoyed time with the kids, and Sally seemed happy. I couldn't recall any major changes at first, but after the second trip, Sally returned in a different mood, sullen and a bit nervous. When I asked, she said it was nothing, just that her period had started. I recalled that since then, we hadn't been intimate on the nights she returned, but we always were a few days before she left. I hadn't thought much about it until now. Sally called me from the top of the stairs. "Phil, it's bath time for the girls. Can you send them up?" I sighed and went upstairs to gather them. I tried to stay calm, but emotions were building inside. When I returned, Sally was in the kitchen, flipping through a cookbook. She smiled, looked me in the eye, and asked, "Is something wrong, honey?" I mumbled about a cracked racket, but kept studying her, looking for signs. She seemed normal, just Sally, my wife. She kissed me and mentioned Debbie had called to plan another shopping trip. When she said it, her eyes narrowed and she quickly looked away. I knew something was off, and I wondered how long this had been going on. I tried to change the subject. "Do we have anything planned for next weekend?" I asked. She said there was nothing on the calendar. I suggested a VFW event on Saturday, but she wasn't interested. "I don't care if your dad goes," she said. "I'm not going. It bores me to tears." I pushed, suggesting a family trip to Cedar Point, but Sally got defensive. "We just took the kids to Mackinac Island. What's gotten into you, Phil? You've never minded me shopping before." I grew frustrated and said, "Never mind. I just thought we could do something together." She walked away, saying, "You and Debbie are having fun. I'll go check on the kids." That night, I pretended to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking. I heard Sally come to bed and whisper my name, but I stayed still. Eventually, she rolled away and I lay awake, reflecting on everything. I thought about my childhood, growing up just a few miles from where we live now. I had a normal, middle-class family, my parents and older sister. My best friend Jace lived a block away. We were inseparable. He was the outgoing, life-of-the-party type, and I was quieter, more thoughtful. We spent our youth playing sports, chasing girls, and in the end, both lost our virginity before prom. In high school, I started taking drafting classes and decided to become an engineer. Jace wasn't sure what he wanted, but we both enrolled in community college. After my first year, I had a big mistake. I got arrested for drunk driving after a party and spent the night in jail. My parents bailed me out and they were furious. After everything, I spent all my savings on fines, court fees, and lost my driver's license for a year. For the rest of the semester, I rode my moped, giving Jace rides. Eventually, I gave up on school. It felt pointless without a license or money. The next year, I enlisted in the Army, hoping my drafting skills would land me an engineering job and keep me out of Vietnam. The recruiter lied, of course. Jace decided to join me, and we enlisted as buddies, guaranteed to train together. Basic training was tough but manageable. During aptitude tests, the Army decided we'd make good fire control specialists, which meant operating a high-tech calculator to help artillery hit targets. Afterward, we were sent to Fort Sill for more training. It wasn't great, but Jace and I had fun. A few weeks before graduation, we received orders for Vietnam. After a short break at home, we flew to I Corps in Vietnam, where we were assigned to Battery A, 2nd Battalion, 11th Artillery. It was November 1969, and Nixon was reducing troop numbers. For the first few months, there wasn't much combat, just a lot of flying and some occasional raids. The highlight of our tour was a wild vacation in Bangkok. Then, our unit was sent to a remote hill in the jungle, and things took a dark turn. 4 months later, I came home on a stretcher, and Jace was dead. I was mentally and physically broken. I spent weeks in the hospital and months in rehab. After being declared almost fit for duty, I returned to Fort Sill as an assistant instructor. I enrolled in college courses to keep busy, avoiding social interactions. After a year, I applied for early release from the Army and was accepted into an engineering program at a local university. I moved back in with my parents and lived on savings, education benefits, and a part-time job. I was a classic shell-shocked Vietnam vet, bitter, withdrawn, and struggling with my experiences. I grew a beard, wore old clothes, and kept to myself. I saw a therapist occasionally, but didn't feel it helped much. I visited Jace's parents regularly to talk about him. It was the least I could do. One day, while studying in the campus center, a woman approached and asked if she could sit with me. She had striking red hair and a pale complexion. I was immediately struck by her, but when she asked if I was a Vietnam vet, I flinched. I said yes, but left it at that. She mentioned her dad was a Korean War vet, and I relaxed a bit. We talked for a while until she had to leave for class. A couple of days later, she returned and asked if she could sit with me again. This time I was more composed, and we chatted like old friends. Eventually, she realized she didn't know my name, so I introduced myself. "Phil Robinson," I said. "Sally Baxter," she replied, laughing. And just like that, I met Sally. It turned out that Sally and I had long breaks between classes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Over the next few weeks, we spent most of those breaks together. She shared almost everything about her life, family, friends, career plans, and I was fascinated by her outgoing social personality. She reminded me a lot of Jace. I told her about my family and classes, but avoided talking about the Army. I preferred to listen to her. Her voice could have read me the phone book, and I'd still be interested. Slowly, I started taking better care of myself, shaving, getting a haircut, and dressing better. My mom noticed and teased me, but she was clearly happy for me. A few weeks in, I finally asked her out. She agreed right away, but warned, "My dad can be tough on guys who ask me out." I told her, "If dating you means dealing with your dad, it's worth it." She blushed and called me a flatterer. That Friday, I knocked on her door and was greeted by her mother, Emily, who welcomed me warmly. Before I could say anything, she called, "Jack, Sally's beau is here." Emily introduced herself and we shook hands. Soon, Sally's father, Jack, appeared. He was big, about my height, but much heavier, and his presence was imposing. He shook my hand firmly and invited me into the family room. As we sat, I noticed military memorabilia, including a Marine Corps flag and an M1 Garand rifle displayed proudly above the fireplace. Jack, a Korean War veteran, mentioned his service and injuries, and I briefly shared that I was a Vietnam vet. We talked about military history, and Jack seemed skeptical, even dismissive of my role. He muttered about Vietnamization and the end of the war, but Emily tried to steer the conversation away from politics. Sally entered, and we quickly shifted topics to school. After a while, we said our goodbyes, and I took Sally out to dinner and a movie. The evening was mostly a blur, as I was so focused on her. We held hands, sitting so close that our heads almost touched. Afterward, we stopped by a bar for a drink, and I walked her to the door. I hesitated, unsure whether to kiss her, but she reached up, wrapped her arms around my neck, and whispered, "Thank you for a wonderful evening." Time seemed to stop as I looked into her eyes, realizing I had fallen in love with her. I kissed her gently, and from that moment on, we shared intimate moments like that, holding each other close, unable to hide our feelings. The next day, I called Sally, and we talked for an hour. We quickly made plans for another date, and just like that, we became exclusive. A few weeks later, when I mentioned booking a motel room for the weekend, she blushed, but smiled and nodded. The evening was everything I hoped for, though there were a few awkward moments when she noticed the scars from Vietnam. I reassured her that I was fine. I whispered, "Sally, I love you. I can't help it." She pulled back, tears in her eyes, and smiled. "I love you too, Phil. I never knew it could be like this." Relieved, I kissed her nose and said, "I want to do this again and again." That night was perfect. For the first time since losing Jace, I felt at peace. We talked about our future, marriage, kids, where to live. Sally was graduating soon, and I would follow a year later. We decided she'd work after graduation, and we'd marry when I finished school. In the meantime, I rented an apartment so we could be together, A week later, I introduced Sally to my parents. They hit it off right away, and my mom later told me she loved Sally for how she brought me out of my shell. I was happy again, smiling constantly, even to the point that my therapist kicked me out, telling me I didn't need his help anymore. Sally's father, Jack, and I had a tense relationship. He was protective, especially when we discussed living together before marriage. But things changed when Jack invited me over for a private conversation. After some small talk, Jack mentioned Sally had told him about my scars. I felt uncomfortable, but Jack understood. We briefly discussed my time in Vietnam, and I told him I had been at Ripcord in the summer of '70. To my surprise, Jack knew about it. After that, he treated me like family. Things moved quickly after that. Sally graduated with honors, got a job, and spent more time with me. Her parents, however, thought she should move in with me permanently. I graduated on time, got a job at General Motors, and 2 months later, we got married. We bought a small house, and a year later, our son Jason was born. 2 years after that, we had Jesse, and then Allison 3 years later. The birth of our kids changed everything. Sally worked part-time after Jason was born and planned to return full-time once the kids were older. Meanwhile, my work evolved as I transitioned into automated manufacturing. By the time Allison was born, I was part of a team learning about the first computer-aided design systems. Life was good. We had plenty of money, 2 cars, and a nice home. Over the years, we expanded with a new bedroom, bathroom, and rec room. We had 3 healthy, beautiful kids and took family vacations every year. Twice a year, Sally and I sent the kids to their grandparents for a long weekend. I always thought our marriage was strong. We loved each other openly, holding hands, hugging, and sharing affection. I often told Sally how lucky I was. But recently, I wasn't so sure anymore. Sleep became elusive, and I spent most nights staring at the wall, barely getting any rest. I skipped my usual morning workout and instead sat at my desk, trying to figure out what was going wrong. I couldn't ask Sally directly. If she was hiding something, she might not tell me the truth. I wasn't even sure what the truth was, but I had a sinking feeling that something was off. I loved Sally and the kids. The thought of losing them terrified me, but the idea that Sally might not love me anymore was even scarier. For days, I felt like a zombie, distracted and disconnected from everything. It wasn't until Jace mentioned my behavior that Sally noticed. I brushed it off as work stress. On Tuesday, I returned to my routine and played racquetball. John and Craig were there, as usual. I'd never seen one without the other, and something about their closeness started to unsettle me. They acted like they shared some secret, and when they smirked at me, I began to see them as rivals. We played a few casual games, but my mind was elsewhere. By Wednesday, I decided to check on their whereabouts. I called John's house, and his wife said he was going to a business conference in Detroit. When I called Craig's house, I got the same answer. My heart sank. I didn't need proof. This was it. I knew they'd met up together. But how far had it gone? I was furious. A voice inside me said, "Do something." That Friday, I stopped by my parents' house. They were renovating in preparation for a potential move to Florida, but I needed their support. After some small talk, I finally blurted out, "I think Sally is cheating on me." The words broke something inside me, and I cried for the first time. My parents were shocked. Mom whispered, "No, not Sally. She wouldn't do that to you." Dad asked, "Why do you think that?" I told them everything. What I had overheard, what I'd learned. Mom cried quietly, and Dad comforted her, asking, "What do you need from us?" "I need to know for sure. Can you take the kids tomorrow and keep them until Sunday? I have to be where they'll be tomorrow night." Dad hesitated, then agreed. "Sure, Phil, but I pray this is all a misunderstanding." "Yeah, me too," I said, though I wasn't sure how it could be. I left feeling hollow, uncertain of what came next. When I got home, Sally was cheerfully finishing dinner. She greeted me with a hug and a kiss, saying, "The kids are in the break room. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. She seemed preoccupied, practically buzzing with energy. It struck me that we hadn't been intimate since the previous Saturday, and we'd missed our usual midweek meeting. I'd been in a bad mood all week, taking sleeping pills to get through the nights, and Sally never mentioned it. I hesitated, then suggested, "How about we put the kids to bed early and have some time for ourselves tonight?" Sally stepped back, and her smile faltered. "I got my period early today," she said, clearly uncomfortable. I forced a smile. "Okay, I understand." She gently stroked my cheek and promised, "As soon as my period is over, I'll explain everything." I nodded, muttering, "Then it's a date." She hugged me and returned to cooking. I slowly headed upstairs, anger brewing inside me. I now knew she was saving herself for tomorrow's date. The voice in my head grew louder. Do something. At dinner, I struggled to hide my emotions. The kids chattered away, unaware. Could this be the last time we had dinner together as a family? The thought brought tears to my eyes. The next day, we followed our usual Saturday routine. The kids cleaned their rooms, then watched cartoons. I spent time in the garage until Sally was ready to leave. She came downstairs with her suitcase, reminding the kids to behave while she was gone. Allie clung to her, demanding she buy her something. Sally promised, kissed Allie goodbye, and left for the hotel. I watched her drive off, holding Allie in my arms. Once she was out of sight, I turned to the kids and told them we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's house for the night. They packed quickly and we headed out. At my parents' house, Dad gave me a concerned look. Good luck, Phil. I hope you're wrong. I hope so too, I replied. Thanks for helping. I'll call you in the morning. I left, switching cars at Avis to avoid recognition. Back home, I sat in the kitchen, replaying the week's events. The phone finally rang around 1 a.m. It was Sally. Is that you, Phil? Yeah, it's me. Is everything okay? I asked with a touch of sarcasm. We're fine. We stopped for lunch. We're in room 168, 555-645-0168, she replied, before rushing off. Debbie's waving at me. We're spending the afternoon at Meadowbrook Shopping Center. I'll see you tomorrow. The phone clicked off without her saying, I love you. That morning, she hadn't said it either. I dialed the Red Roof Inn, confirming Sally had checked in. I decided I wouldn't call her room. I'd see her later. I hung up, then dialed again. I called the Red Roof Inn again, asking if John Harrison was registered. They confirmed he was, but hadn't checked in yet. I said I'd call back later and hung up, trying to control the rising anger that felt like it could explode at any moment. I went into the workshop, unlocked the tool cabinet, and stood staring at my dad's old rifle. I thought about taking one with me, but the idea of never seeing my kids again stopped me. Instead, I grabbed a beat-up shoebox from the drawer and pulled out a sea knife I'd bought in Bangkok. I strapped it to my calf, then gathered a few things, driving gloves, water, candy bars, and headed out at 2 p.m. for the 90-mile drive to Rochester Hills. I parked near the Red Roof Inn by room 168, but didn't see Sally's car. I waited, thinking about her and the kids. Around 5, I saw John and Craig arrive in a red pickup, laughing and unloading bags. They went into a nearby room, and after about 45 minutes, they left. I followed them to Tupper's Pub, where I parked on the street and waited. Soon, I spotted Sally's car and parked so I could see both it and the truck. I debated going inside, but stayed in the car, listening to country songs that matched my mood. At 9 p.m., the 4 of them finally left, laughing and holding hands. I decided to beat them back to the hotel. I parked, and 10 minutes later, they pulled in. I watched them outside, talking and laughing under the light by room 1. John tossed a coin, and Craig kissed Sally. Debbie grabbed John's hand, and they all went into different rooms, still laughing. My mind raced. Was this some kind of game? The pain hit hard, and the voice in my head screamed, do something. I couldn't undo what had happened. 10 years of marriage, a family, all ruined. What good would confronting them do now? At least I'd know the truth. Then John came out of Debbie's room holding a beer, dressed in boxer shorts. He walked over to Sally's room and knocked. A few minutes later, Craig came out of Debbie's room, no shirt or shoes. They talked briefly before high-fiving each other. John went into Sally's room and Craig went back to Debbie's. Suddenly, it hit me. I'd completely lost control. A voice screamed in my head, do something now! I felt a surge of madness. Unable to stop, I put on my driving gloves, got out of the car, and walked straight to room 168. I covered the peephole with my thumb and knocked twice. As the door began to open and John said, what the hell, Craig? I threw a punch, kicking him with all my anger. John stumbled back and fell to the floor, hands over his face. I noticed the disarray in the room, the overturned bed, the bathroom door slightly ajar, and the shower running. I unsheathed my knife and tapped it against John's nose. His eyes widened in fear. How long, John? How long has this been going on? Don't lie to me, I said coldly. 2 years, he stammered, eyes wide. Joining the same racquetball league wasn't a coincidence? No, he whispered, closing his eyes in pain. I leaned in. You're sick, John. Look at me. I paused. If you ever go near Sally or any other married woman again, I'll find you and make sure you regret it. Understand? Yes, he wheezed, terrified. Suddenly, I smelled something foul. The shower stopped, and I heard Sally's voice. Hey, John boy, I thought you were joining me in the shower. I turned, just as Sally appeared in the bathroom doorway, towel in hand, her face draining of color as she saw me. Shock overtook her as the towel fell to the floor. "John Boy doesn't seem well," I growled, stepping toward her. Panic flashed in her eyes as she slammed the bathroom door shut. I walked over to the nightstand, cut the phone cord with my knife, and sheathed the blade. Then I stormed out, but not before throwing the phone violently into the bathroom door, causing a loud crash and a terrified scream from inside. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and realized I wasn't done yet. I headed to the next room. I knocked on the door of Craig's room. When it opened, I punched him under the chin. He went down, and Debbie, wide-eyed and in a panic, sat in bed. I checked Craig's pulse. He was fading. I went to the nightstand, pulled the phone cord, and turned to Debbie. "If you tell your husband about tonight, tell him I said hi," I said sarcastically, then added, "or maybe I'll tell him myself." I tossed the phone into the corner and left. Outside, I looked up at the sky and took a deep breath, the tension gradually fading. The voice in my head was silent now. Everything was done. It was time to move on with my life. As I made my way to the car, my phone rang. Annoyed, I answered. "Yeah?" "Phil, it's Jack," came the voice on the other end. "What's going on?" I asked, my tone uninterested. "Sally's at the house crying. She says she's afraid to go home." I glanced at the clock, almost 1 p.m., nearly 14 hours since I'd left Rochester Hills. "I don't know what I could have done," I muttered, feeling confused. "She says you hurt Debbie's friends badly last night." "Hurt them? They're lucky I didn't eliminated them," I shot back sarcastically. "What the hell? That's not like you," Jack responded, clearly shocked. I paused for a moment, then asked, "Did Sally tell you where the fight happened? She mentioned it was outside a restaurant in Rochester Hills." "So she's trying to avoid it?" Jack replied, his tone sharp. "Well, with her family and history." I trailed off. "Sally's your daughter, so I guess it must be true," I said slowly, sensing Jack was processing everything. "Phil, I'm bringing Sally home. We need to talk," Jack said. "No problem," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Jack hung up, but I heard Sally in the background. "No, Dad, no." I sighed. She's not making this easy, I thought. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking my second beer and looking through old photos when Jack and Sally arrived. Sally clung to Jack's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Please, Dad, let us talk. Phil and I need some time alone." Sally was makeup-free, her hair loose, eyes red and swollen, shaking like a nervous wreck. She wouldn't look at me, trying to guide Jack back toward the door, but he sat down at the table, his eyes darting between me and the KA knife beside my beer. "Okay, Phil, what's going on?" Jack asked, his voice tight. I looked at Sally and mockingly said, "Yes, Sally, tell your dad what's going on." She snapped, "Shut up, Phil, you and I can work this out." Her commanding voice didn't match the pleading in her eyes. I was furious. The idea that she thought we could fix this alone, or that she could manipulate me, pushed me further. I was determined to be as honest as she was dishonest. I turned to Jack. "Sally and her boss Debbie have a couple of girlfriends they go out with when they're out of town." "I found out, and didn't take it well." I paused, then added, "I might have been a little more polite than she deserved." Sally sighed, sitting down, her face dropping. Jack looked at me in disbelief. "No, Phil, Sally wouldn't do that. I don't believe you." "Enough, Phil," Jack snapped, his anger rising. "You're being cruel." I stared at him, then shot back. "Cruel? You would have seen what I saw last night, another man's footprints in her hotel room." I said it flatly. Jack's eyes flicked to Sally, and her panicked expression made it clear I was telling the truth. Jack slumped in his chair, his face crumpling as he covered it with his hands, whispering, "Oh, God." Sally's face turned pale. "Please, Dad, don't tell Mom. We can work this out, can't we? Please, Phil," she begged. I said nothing, just sifted through the old photos, lost in the pain of the past. After a few minutes, Jack straightened up, wiped his eyes, and asked, "What are you going to do, Phil?" He looked at Sally, whose tears hadn't stopped. I thought for a moment, then said, "I never told either of you about Vietnam, or Ripcord." I sighed. "Hell, I never told anyone about Ripcord, not even my therapist." I waved at the pile of photos on the table. "Isn't it funny, Jack? Your generation proudly displays their war medals, while mine hides its memories in shoeboxes, locked away." I picked up an old, faded photo of 2 young soldiers in jungle uniforms, smiling like it was some casual outing. "Jace and I were dropped at Ripcord in May 1971. It was just another base in our rotation. set up tools, supported the troops, and moved on. I paused, looking at Jack. But this time, it was different. We were stationed on a remote ridge near the Laos border, overlooking the A Shau Valley. It was a bad place for the U.S. military. Previous battles there had cost many lives. The Ripcord base was meant to support 4 battalions of the 101st Airborne, trying to stop the NVA from pushing down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I shook my head. What a joke. The base had our 155 battery, a mortar platoon, and a company of infantry. We had 2 helicopter pads and a few other basic units, maybe 400 men at most. The whole base was underground, bunkers, trenches, tunnels. We didn't know until later that we were surrounded by 12,000 NVA soldiers. I met Jack's eyes. Does that remind you of anything, Jack? Like your Marines at Chosin Reservoir? Jack nodded slowly, lost in thought. After a moment of silence, I spoke. The first few weeks weren't so bad for us, I said. But for those dropped into combat positions on the hills, it was hell. Helicopters were in and out from dawn till dusk. We only took occasional sniper or automatic fire, but the incoming anti-aircraft fire grew stronger. I looked at Jack, then continued. On July 1st, everything changed. Just after 7 a.m., we took our first mortar fire. For the next week, the NVA bombarded us with 30 shells a day from 60 and 81 mm mortars. Then they started using 120 mm mortars, new weapons that had never been outside the DMZ. The worst part, I said, my voice trailing off, was that you couldn't always hear the shells coming. The wind, helicopters, and artillery fire made it hard to tell. One day, I was running from the mess hall to the bunker when a mortar blast knocked me down. I got to the bunker and Jace, looking up, said, "Damn, Phil, you're bleeding." I smiled weakly at the memory. I'd forgotten my body armor that day. Never again, I added with a sigh. The shrapnel shot me under my right shoulder blade. They evacuated me to Camp Evans to have it removed. It wasn't serious, but they kept me for a couple of days for a concussion. By the time I returned to Ripcord, we were taking 80 shells a day. It got heavier. Mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, recoilless tools. We were losing more men every day. Our tools were firing nonstop. We were using so much ammo the batteries ran out in hours. Chinooks brought in more shells, while .51 caliber NVA fire rained down on them. Once they dropped off ammo, we rushed in to load the tools. I paused, recalling the chaos. During one of these operations, I took another half-dozen shrapnel wounds. Between the constant bombardment, our regular work, and bringing ammo to the tools, we were beyond exhausted. Planes, F-4S, Phantoms, even B-52S, were constantly around, bombing the hills. Smoke and tear gas from the NVA lingered in the air. And after July 8th, when we first spotted the dinkies in the wire, we were on high alert every night. We knew an attack was coming, we just didn't know when. The room was quiet, the weight of the moment settling in. Jack's face was grim, and Sally looked like she was bracing herself. I took a deep breath. As the shelling continued, we started taking serious casualties. Morale was plummeting. We felt abandoned. Before it was over, I said quietly, we lost over 500 men, dead and wounded. I was assigned to carry body bags to the helipad for evacuation. I looked at Jack, my eyes filling. On July 18th, the worst thing happened. A Chinook carrying howitzer shells was hit and crashed over a battery and ammo supply point. The explosion was massive. The battery burst into flames and explosions kept going for hours. All 6 tools were destroyed and dozens of men were injured. I paused, the image still fresh. We rushed to the battery to help. Many of the wounded had severe burns from the aviation fuel. Jace and I lifted one machine gunner onto a stretcher. When I grabbed his arm, the skin came off in my hand. The smell of burning flesh. I'll never forget it. Jack nodded gravely, his face filled with grief. Sally looked horrified as I spoke. I wiped my eyes and pressed on. We all knew this position wouldn't hold, but the brass didn't care. They saw it as a chance to hit the enemy. After all, we had almost 4 NVA regiments in one spot. A few nights later, I said, my voice growing colder, we went on high alert. We were hit with automatic weapons fire around the perimeter. Jace and I set up an M60 in a trench in front of the FDC bunker, ready for an attack. The mortar platoon kept firing flares, and the infantry returned fire along the jungle's edge. Every few minutes, I continued, artillery ships flew overhead, firing rockets and miniguns at suspicious targets. Jace and I didn't return fire often, to avoid drawing attention to our position, especially since there was an infantry squad just 30 yards ahead. This night, I went on, my tone distant. The infantry kept popping up and firing grenades and automatic weapons. Then suddenly, 20 mm mortar rounds hit their position. The ground shook as we dove into our foxhole. I paused, the danger still fresh in my mind. When we peeked out, the infantry trench was completely buried. We quickly took up firing positions, and Jace started shooting while I fed him ammo. The platoon sergeant crawled over, and we told him what happened. He nodded, ducked down, and rushed off for more ammo. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. Just as we were finishing the last ammo belt, I heard an M16 shot. It felt like being hit with a baseball bat in my back and thighs. I collapsed on the edge of the trench, staring into Jace's eyes. I saw the realization in his face, but he couldn't speak. I held his hand. He squeezed it once, then the light left his eyes. I knew it was over. My throat tightened. My best friend, my brother, was gone. I felt completely alone. I wiped my eyes again, hearing Sally sniffle, but I wasn't sure whether it was for Jace or her own emotions. I took a deep breath and went on. I looked up to see Corporal Tran standing in front of us, an M16 aimed at us. Tran was one of Kit Carson's scouts, a North Vietnamese deserter. He fired a whole clip at us. I took a couple of bullets in my back, but my body armor saved me from worse, though I had broken ribs and a severe concussion. One bullet shot my thigh but didn't hit bone. I started to go into shock, realizing Jace was gone and I'd been shot. I paused, steadying myself. I fought to stay conscious. I couldn't let myself pass out. I focused on anger, thinking of getting revenge on the enemy. As the rage built, my vision blurred, and my mind clouded with hatred. Tran noticed I was moving and tried to shoot again, but he had emptied his clip. I played dead, and he must have decided I was done. He dropped his rifle, jumped over our trench, and started waving a flashlight, shouting in Vietnamese. I pressed on, shaking as I recalled the chaos. Then a rocket-propelled grenade flew from the bushes, narrowly missing both of us. Tran kept waving his flashlight like a madman. Through the flare light, I saw 3 figures, sappers, emerge from the jungle, wearing satchel charges and holding AK-47s. I barely had the strength to stand, but I grabbed the M60 beneath Jace and aimed at them. I fired 2 long bursts before the belt ran out. The sappers went down, and Tran stared at me, shocked. He screamed, spitting as he grabbed a machete from his belt. Most scouts carried them to navigate the jungle, I added. I barely had time to get my foot on the trench's edge and push off before Tran lunged at me. I dropped the M60 and grabbed my knife. We were almost unconscious, but I managed to get on top of him. He reached for the machete, but never got it. I closed my eyes, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by the flickering light of flares, explosions, tracer rounds, howitzers rumbling, and the smell of cordite and burning debris. It felt like I was in hell. I continued hoarsely. Eric, my platoon sergeant, pulled me by one arm and Lieutenant Dixon by the other. Dixon was shouting for me to get to the bunker, napalm was coming, and we were too close to the wire. I took a sip of beer, tracing my knife across the purple hearts on the table. Jack and Sally were silent. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I went on. That's when I lost consciousness. I woke up in a medical bunker with an IV in my arm. A battalion surgeon and corpsmen were working on me. Doc said I'd probably survive and that they'd evacuate me at dawn, I added, my voice shaky. I was flown out around noon, miraculously. Every helicopter was under heavy fire. 2 had already been shot down. Mine took several hits, one that liquidated the crew commander. But by then, they'd decided to evacuate Ripcord. I paused, looking at the table. They took everyone out on the 21st and bombed the place. I didn't care. 24 hours later, I was on a flight to Japan, then transferred to Walter Reed for a month. I sighed deeply. While I was there, some colonel who probably never heard of Ripcord handed me a medal for eliminating my enemies. I took the silver star from the box and placed it beside the purple hearts. It was the same one on Jack's mantle. I shook my head. The doctors treated me well, but mentally I wasn't fine. I had nightmares every night, couldn't shake the sounds, smells, and faces of the dead and wounded. I paused, looking away. I missed Jace's funeral, but went home before reporting to SIL Base. I visited Jace's parents. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. They wanted to know about Vietnam, what happened to Jace, but didn't ask a single question. I swallowed, struggling to speak. Why did I survive and he didn't? I said softly. I ask myself that every day. I stared blankly ahead, lost in thought. I was in therapy, but felt withdrawn from the world. I did the bare minimum at Fort Sill and buried myself in college drafting to avoid socializing. When I left the Army, I moved back with my parents and went to school, not because I cared, but because I didn't know what else to do. I looked up at Sally. Then I met you, I whispered. Sally lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. You brought me back to life. You were happy, engaged in everything, beautiful inside and out, everything I thought I wasn't. You made me want to live again. You gave me a glimpse of what life could be. She paused, her voice breaking. I fell in love with you. You saved me, and you gave me 3 beautiful children. I'll always be grateful for that. I sighed. For a while, we just sat there, not moving. Finally, Jack cleared his throat. What now, Phil? I turned to him, tired. Jack, I've been betrayed twice in my life. Both times, I lost my best friend. Sally started sobbing. No, no, no. The room was silent. Sally cried. Jack and I had tears in our eyes. Jack asked quietly, Are you sure, Phil, you want to throw it all away over one mistake? Sally lifted her head, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I knew what I had to say would end our marriage, but I couldn't let the lie stand. I shook my head. The mistake wasn't just one, Jack. I looked at Sally, my voice firm. I found out last night that Sally's been cheating on me for almost 2 years, and it wasn't just with one man. Sally sighed, closed her eyes, and shook her head, sinking deeper into her chair, looking even paler than before. I turned to Jack. Does that answer your question? I asked. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes full of sorrow as he looked at Sally. You're my daughter, and I should love you, but I've lost all respect for you, your actions. He trailed off, unable to find the words, just shaking his head. Sally reached out, but Jack pulled away. He looked at me and said firmly, Phil, you don't deserve this. Do what you have to do, but don't hurt her. I couldn't take it anymore. No, Jack, I'm beyond that, I replied. But if it makes you feel better, take this. I slipped the knife back into its sheath and handed it to him. Jack accepted it silently, then turned to leave. His shoulders slumped, and I could tell he was already thinking about how to tell Emily when the door closed behind him. The phone rang, but neither of us moved or spoke. The ringing eventually stopped, and the silence was deafening. Finally, I broke it, staring blankly ahead. I thought the cops would be here this morning, not your father. Sally flinched and stumbled over her words. Debbie and I told them to say we were attacked outside the bar. We hoped if they kept quiet, you wouldn't call their wives. I processed this, realizing I was free. There was no way their story would hold up. For a moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but then I remembered everything was falling apart around me. So, where are they now? I asked flatly. Sally cleared her throat, fidgeting in her chair. They're still in the hospital, under observation. You hurt them badly. John has a broken nose, cheekbone, and ribs. Craig has a dislocated jaw, broken teeth, and a concussion. I replied bluntly, Don't forget their balls, Sally. Fear filled her eyes. No, no, you really hurt them. She paused, then added, I didn't know you were so cruel, Phil. Did you have to do that? I stared at her, incredulous. You're defending those fools? I said sarcastically. Before she could respond, the phone rang again. You should answer it, I said, heading to the bathroom. It's probably for you. I washed my face, looking at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and puffy. I looked as worn down as I felt. It had been a sleepless night. Back in the kitchen, Sally was standing there, staring at the phone. Slowly, she hung it up and collapsed into a chair. When I sat back down, she spoke, her voice distant. Did you have to tell Debbie's husband? I shrugged. Why shouldn't I? He already called John and Craig's wives and kicked Debbie out. She's going to need a lawyer if she wants to see her daughter. Sally started crying again. Crap, crap, crap. Through her tears, she looked up at me. And she fired me. Said it was all my fault. I laughed bitterly. Oh, that's just perfect. I paused. Tell me, Sally, who introduced you to John and Craig? It was Debbie, wasn't it? Through sniffles, she asked. How did you know? I smiled grimly. When I told Josh about what you and Debbie did last night, he didn't believe me. Called me a liar, accused me of trying to ruin his marriage. But when I mentioned John Harrison's name, he turned pale and started swearing. First time I ever saw him angry. I paused. You told me years ago that Debbie's second marriage was strained and she was estranged from her parents. Well, she has a sister upstate she doesn't talk to either. I took a breath. About a year ago, Josh was auditing a company and met Sarah, Debbie's sister. They hit it off, and one night, Sarah invited him to dinner with her husband, Dave. Sarah had a story to tell. I looked at Sally, whose face had gone white with shock. Turns out Dave was Debbie's first husband. She cheated on him throughout their marriage. He found out, kicked her out, and filed for divorce. I stopped, watching Sally's reaction. Debbie never told Josh any of this. And guess who she had an affair with during her first marriage? That's right, John Harrison. Sally froze. I continued. When I mentioned John's name, Josh put the pieces together and realized Debbie had been doing the same thing to him that you did to me. No wonder he threw her out. I took a deep breath. And like Josh, I'm wondering how long you've been fooling around with me, I said firmly. Sally cried again. Oh my God, Phil. It was just John and Craig, just during our shopping trips. Please believe me. I hadn't thought about anyone else until Debbie mentioned it. Before our first shopping trip, she sat there, twirling a handkerchief, crying and begging. Please, Phil. I don't know how I ended up here. It's like I woke up from a nightmare. When I walked into the bathroom and saw you there, I didn't say anything, just looked at her grimly. Encouraged, she spoke quickly. I knew Debbie liked to play, but I didn't expect her to hook up with anyone on our trip. She paused, biting her lip. John showed up at the restaurant. Debbie said she'd known him since high school, but I suspected that wasn't true. He was charming, flirted, danced with both of us, complimented me a lot. I had a few more drinks than usual, and when his hands got too familiar on the dance floor, I pretended not to notice. Later, Debbie went with John to the room next to ours. I realized she set the whole thing up. The walls were thin, and I could hear them all night. That explains why you were like that when you came home, right? I looked at her with disgust. Sally, you're unbelievable. Sally hung her head and wiped her eyes. The next morning, John was gone. We had breakfast, and Debbie went on and on about their night together, raving about him the whole way home. She paused, then added, over the next few months, Debbie and I had lunch a couple times a week. She'd always talk about John and how much fun they had. That's when I first heard about his wart, Sally said softly. Debbie joked I should try it, but at first I just laughed it off. The more she talked, though, the more the idea stuck in my head. A few months later, when another shopping trip came up, Debbie confessed that John really wanted to be with me, and she didn't mind. I laughed, but I asked her what she'd do if I went along with it, Sally continued. She said John had a friend, Craig, who would keep her company. I didn't say no, though I don't know why. I told her I'd think about it, but I wasn't sure I could. Sally looked at me, but I just stared back blankly. I knew it was wrong, Phil, but I thought I could do it and no one would ever know. She looked down again, her voice soft. That Saturday night, John and Craig came to the restaurant. We had dinner, drinks, and then went to a nightclub. We split into couples, and I ended up with John. I'd had enough to drink by then and convinced myself it was fine. Everyone was having a great time. Later, we went back to the motel, and John and I went to our room while Debbie and Craig went to theirs. Sally fell silent, staring at her hands. I finally spoke dismissively. So, was it what you expected? Sally looked at me with tears in her eyes. It was fine. It wasn't better than what we have, but it was exciting because it was wrong, and I could pretend to be someone else. You mean it wasn't just okay? I said bitterly. He turned you on so much that you forgot about your husband at home? The one who takes care of the kids so you could be alone? Sally turned away, fighting a sob. Yes, she whispered. And Craig, my husband, I said sarcastically. Without looking at me, she replied. After we slept with John a few times, Debbie joked she was starting to miss him. I didn't think much about it, but the next trip, when we split into couples, I danced with Craig most of the night. Later, he came to my room and we spent the night together. It didn't seem like a big deal. Then, a couple trips later, John and Craig swapped in the middle of the night. I didn't realize at first until I woke up and realized the man in my bed wasn't the one I started with. Sally looked at me sadly. I felt like two different people living in two different worlds. I liked our life, our family, but I got hooked on those weekends. I thought I could have both, and you'd never find out. How stupid was I? Damn stupid, I agreed. And then when you saw me at the motel, I looked in the mirror and realized what I had become. she whispered. I stood up and looked down at her. Interesting story, Sally. Too bad it doesn't have a happy ending. Or maybe it does for you. I'm going to get the kids. Tonight, after Allie's asleep, we'll sit down with Jason and Jesse and tell them their parents will be living apart. I'll leave out the details to minimize the trauma. I'll sleep on the couch until I figure out what comes next, Sally shouted after me, crying. Phil, don't do this. I love you. Please, don't. I turned to her. Why not? Through sobs, she begged. It was only a few nights a year. I never saw John or Craig outside those weekends. Please, Phil, forgive me. Let me fix it. Forgive you? I shook my head. Forgive you for being a promiscuous for other men a few nights a year? For giving away the thing you valued most? Yourself? For destroying my trust? My belief that we belong to each other? I sighed. And how do you fix that? Can you undo it? Can you not be with John or Craig? Because that's what it takes to make it right. I looked around the kitchen. The family photos, the kids' drawings, Allie's baby chair in the corner, everything that made this place a home. I spent most of last night thinking about how I'll feel in 6 months, a year, or 5 years. I might forgive you, but I won't forget. I paused, my voice breaking. Every time I see you, I'll remember last night. Every time I hear your voice or your name, I'll think of it. And that, Sally, I can't live with. I stood silently for a moment, barely noticing Sally rocking back and forth, crying, whispering, No, please, God, no. A few minutes later, I spoke softly. Can you answer me one question, Sally? She looked up at me, empty-eyed, like a condemned prisoner awaiting the sentence. You lost the man who loved you more than anything. You lost the respect of your parents, my parents, and me. You lost your job. And someday, you'll have to explain to our children why you destroyed our family. Was it worth it? After a long silence, broken only by her sobs, I turned and slowly walked out the door.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The soft hum of classical music filled the air, setting a romantic mood in the dimly lit restaurant, its warm glow casting a gentle ambience over the evening. Barbara adjusted her wine glass, tapping her manicured nails lightly against it as she leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Jake across the table. Jake's confident grin widened. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his tailored suit spoke to the authority of a man who was used to taking charge. As head of the marketing department, Jake had the kind of charisma that could command a boardroom and Barbara's heart. Tonight marked a secret anniversary, 6 months since their affair began. For Barbara, every glance, every touch shared across the mahogany table carried a thrilling sense of forbidden excitement. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and mischief as she sipped her wine, savoring both its rich flavor and the intoxicating presence of Jake. Their romance had grown in the midst of office life. Barbara, once diligent and reserved, found herself irresistibly drawn to Jake's magnetic personality during late-night meetings and shared projects. He was everything her husband, David, was not. Spontaneous, daring, and capable of making her feel truly alive. David, her husband of 5 years, was steady and reliable, a man who loved her with a quiet devotion and had stood by her through thick and thin. But with Jake, she felt something she hadn't in years: passion, excitement, a spark of electricity that surged through her veins. As she traced the rim of her glass, Barbara's mind briefly wandered to the life she'd left behind for this fleeting passion. David, who had built their life together with patience and sacrifice, was everything she once believed she wanted. But with Jake, there were no routines, no expectations, just stolen moments of wild excitement. Where David offered stability and comfort, Jake represented fire and adrenaline, a contrast that Barbara found herself craving more and more. Her thoughts were pulled back to the present as Jake's voice filled the air. His hand rested lightly on hers, sending a jolt of energy through her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his deep voice soft. Barbara smiled, tilting her head coyly. "Just how lucky I am to be here with you tonight," she replied. Jake grinned, clearly pleased, and raised his glass. "To 6 unforgettable months," he toasted. Barbara echoed him, her voice steady, though inside, a quiet battle raged. She was breaking every rule she once held dear, yet her heart raced with defiance. After all, there was only one life to live, and she wanted it all, rules and morality be damned. Jake leaned in, his fingers gently wrapping around her hand, his dark eyes glinting with mischief. "Are you thinking too much again?" he asked softly. "Maybe you're worried about your husband, David? By the way, how's he doing?" Barbara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, everything's fine. My husband's like any other husband, though he's been a little on edge lately. He visited his parents at their ranch a couple of days ago. Hasn't seen them in a while, and he's especially concerned about his father. He's getting older, and David feels guilty for not visiting more often." Jake raised an intrigued eyebrow. "A ranch? I never figured David for the cowboy type." Barbara giggled, a blush creeping across her cheeks. "Oh, trust me, David's no cowboy. He's too calm and kind. His personality just doesn't match that kind of spirit." Jake smirked, his voice teasing. "A real man should passionately love a woman, take risks, be adventurous. Not some gray worm." His words hung in the air, charged with playful defiance. Then, with a wicked grin, he leaned closer. "Now, me, I'm a real man. And after dinner, we're going to have a race, a real love race." Barbara's cheeks flushed deeper, laughter escaping her lips at his audacity. She tilted her head, her voice turning flirtatious as she responded, "Is that so? Well, I think I'm up for the challenge." "A love race, huh? And what exactly does that involve?" Barbara teased, her voice soft as she leaned in closer. Jake leaned forward, his lips just a whisper away from hers. "Let's just say it's not for the faint of heart. You'll have to trust me," he murmured, his voice low and confident. Barbara was about to offer a flirtatious reply when their conversation was interrupted by the waiter, who arrived with 2 covered desserts, placing them on the table. "Excuse me," Barbara said, furrowing her brows in confusion. "We didn't order dessert." The waiter smiled politely, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's a gift." Barbara turned her gaze to Jake, her eyes sparkling with both suspicion and delight. "Honey, maybe you arranged this surprise?" Jake leaned back, a smug smile on his face. "Oh, I'm a master of surprises. But come on, ordering dessert? That's way too small for my scale." The waiter chuckled softly and stepped away, leaving the 2 of them to stare at the mysterious desserts before them. Barbara laughed, the tension from earlier melting away. "A gift, huh? Maybe the universe is sending us a sign, a little cosmic approval of our arrangement." Jake raised his wine glass, his grin confident. "To signs from the universe." They clinked glasses, their laughter blending with the soft hum of the restaurant. The moment felt surreal, perfect, even as if their clandestine relationship was somehow blessed by fate. The atmosphere shifted as Jake reached for the lid of his dessert, lifting it with a flourish. Inside, an elegant piece of chocolate cake was topped with glossy icing, with a joker playing card stuck in the center. Jake tilted his head, a half-smile forming on his lips. "What the hell?" he muttered, plucking the card from the cake. "I don't get it. What kind of stupid joke is this?" Barbara, sitting across from him, felt a pang of unease at the sight of the card. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table as she reached for her own dessert. Slowly, she removed the lid, revealing a similar piece of cake. But atop hers was something more, a glint of metal. A cherry impaled on a ring sat perched on top. For a moment, Barbara's breath caught in her throat as her mind jumped to a romantic conclusion. "Jake," she said, her voice nervous, holding the cake closer. "I have a ring. Are you really—" "Wait." Her voice faltered, and her heart dropped as her eyes widened in horror. "Jake, this is David's wedding ring." Panic surged through her chest. Her hands trembled as her mind raced. How was her husband's ring here, in this restaurant? Her thoughts spun, each possibility more terrifying than the last. She stared at Jake, but he seemed more annoyed than alarmed. They sat in uncomfortable silence, each trying to process the bizarre turn of events. Then, a shadow fell over the table as a man impeccably dressed in a crisp suit approached. Without invitation, he sat down, his presence radiating authority. His sharp, steady gaze carried the precision of someone used to command. Barbara and Jake exchanged bewildered glances but didn't speak. "I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "I won't take up much of your time." His composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos at the table. Jake, ever brash, leaned forward. His expression hardened. "What the hell is going on? Who are you? And what kind of twisted joke is this? Are you looking for trouble?" The man remained unflustered. "My name is William," he said, his tone unwavering. "I would ask you to remain calm. There's no need for aggression." From his jacket, William pulled out a slim leather folder and handed it to Barbara. Before the lady opens this, I have a proposition for you, Jake. Jake's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his expression. I understand you're a man who enjoys a good gamble, William continued, nodding toward the joker card still clutched in Jake's hand. My client has a simple request. A bet, $50,000. If you're willing to make the wager, you can walk away tonight without further consequences. Jake burst into laughter, the sound echoing loudly enough to attract a few curious stares from nearby tables. Are you serious? Perhaps you also want me to strip on the table and dance for the audience? This is insane. Who's pulling the strings here? David? Is he your client? William's smile didn't falter. He nodded once, confirming Jake's suspicion. Barbara's fingers fumbled as she opened the folder William had handed her. Her gasp was audible as her eyes fell on the contents. Divorce papers, already signed and ready to file. No, this can't be happening, she stammered, her voice trembling. How did this even? What is this? Jake glanced at the papers, his expression turning smug. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing dismissively. Barbara, baby, he said, his voice dripping with bravado. I'm sure it's nothing. Don't worry about it. It seemed that David had decided to take a bold stand. Jake's response was nonchalant, as if it didn't faze him. So what? It's not a big deal. Honestly, it's about time you cut ties with that fool, he said, shrugging it off. Barbara's voice faltered as she tried to explain. Her mind was still reeling. Jake, you don't understand. David and I have so many unresolved financial issues, and now he's filed for divorce, out of nowhere. I don't even know what's going to happen. Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence. Relax, Barbara. We'll get a good lawyer, and your David will be begging for mercy before this is over. He dismissed William with a wave of his hand. As for this ruined evening, I'll take care of him. I'll show him his place before you even have to think about what happens next. Barbara's hands trembled as she opened the folder William had given her. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the contents. Divorce papers, already signed, ready to be filed. No, this can't be happening, she stammered. How did this even? What is this? Jake glanced at the papers with a dismissive smirk. Barbara, baby, relax, he said, his voice oozing with confidence. It's about time you dumped that puppy. This whole thing is nothing. Barbara's anxiety only grew as Jake's callousness sank in. Her hands shook as she held the divorce papers in her lap. But Jake, this is serious. Before she could finish, William spoke again, his voice calm and steady. So, you're refusing my offer? He asked, his tone almost wearied. Of course, I'm refusing, Jake retorted, his voice rising. Why should I listen to some guy who thinks he can dictate terms to me? Let him go to hell. And you, get out of here too, or I'll call the staff to throw you out. William remained unfazed. I'm sorry, he said simply. No need to make a scene. I'll leave. Barbara has a surprise waiting for her at home. Good night. With that, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking softly against the restaurant floor. Barbara's heart raced. A surprise, she echoed, her voice trembling. What is going on? Jake, I need to go home right now. I'm scared. Jake remained calm, flashing her a reassuring grin. Relax, Barbara. I'll go with you. Don't worry. I'll handle everything. You're with me now. She didn't respond, her thoughts swirling. Jake paid the bill and let her out, his upbeat demeanor a stark contrast to her growing sense of dread. The drive home was tense. While Jake hummed along to the radio, Barbara stared out the window, her mind filled with anxious thoughts. What if David is waiting for me at home? She asked softly. Jake chuckled, dismissing her fears. Even better. I'll have a little chat with him and put him in his place. Barbara didn't feel reassured. Maybe we shouldn't go. This has gone too far, Jake. But Jake interrupted her, his tone still light. Come on, Barbara. He's already filed for divorce, and he's got the papers ready. What's the difference now? Let's face the consequences, and I'll teach him a lesson. Barbara swallowed her fear, but it didn't ease the growing pit in her stomach. As they pulled into her driveway, her heart sank. The lights were on inside the house, glowing eerily through the windows. Jake parked with a flourish. Let's get this over with, he said, stepping out of the car with confident strides. Barbara followed him reluctantly, her steps heavy with dread. She knew whatever awaited them inside would not be good. As they entered the house, the silence was palpable. Barbara flipped the light switch, revealing an eerily quiet home. She glanced around, half expecting David to jump out from the shadows. But there was no sign of him. In fact, Most of his belongings were gone. Jake chuckled, glancing around with satisfaction. See? I told you. He ran off like a coward. Probably back to his parents' ranch. Barbara didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the room, uneasy. Something wasn't right. Then, her gaze landed on the kitchen table where a sleek black folder rested, its presence conspicuous. A chill ran through her as she approached it. She opened the folder, gasping as she read the handwritten note inside. Darling, I know everything about your double life. I have 3 months' worth of evidence. Divorce is the only way for you to atone for your sins. But there will be consequences. And by the way, look in this folder for some information about your impudent lover. Barbara's heart raced. She flipped to the next set of documents, photographs and printouts that left her breathless. The images were of Jake, with other women, one at a restaurant, another at a hotel lobby, a third laughing with him at a bar. Tears welled in Barbara's eyes as she held the evidence out to Jake, her voice barely a whisper. What is this? Jake, what is this? Are you seeing other women? Barbara's voice quivered as she held up the photos. Jake's expression shifted from anger to a defensive smirk. It's a pathetic fake, he said, leaning closer to point at one of the images. Look at this one. It's clearly doctored. This woman? She's just a former client, a contractor I worked with. And this one? He jabbed at another photo, his tone quickening, is just a college friend. Sure, I was polite and friendly, but that's it. These are just photos from casual conversations. They're twisting things to make something out of nothing. Barbara sniffled, wiping her eyes as she tried to process his explanation. So you're saying these are all misunderstandings? Jake placed his hands on her shoulders, locking eyes with her. Absolutely. These photos are just designed to hurt us. It's all part of David's twisted game. Look closely. Do you see me kissing anyone? No. It's clearly fake, designed by a good editor. These are lies, Barbara. You can't let him get to you. Barbara hesitated but nodded, her doubts easing under Jake's reassurance. However, inside, Jake was seething, his mind racing for more excuses to cover up the damning evidence. He couldn't let Barbara suspect him, not now, especially with David's manipulative tactics at play. Barbara turned back to the folder, her blood running cold as she read the next note. Tell Jake that if he wants, he can make a $100,000 charitable donation to my account. It'll clear his conscience, and he can breathe easier. Jake's face twisted with fury as he read the note. This is insane, he roared. 100,000? What does he think this is, some kind of mob operation? He grabbed the papers, tearing them to shreds with raw anger. I'll tell you what's going to happen next. Tomorrow, I'm hiring the best damn lawyer in the city. We're going to destroy David in court, just like I'm ripping these papers apart. This ends now. Barbara watched him, a swirl of emotions running through her as Jake's fiery determination temporarily soothed her nerves. She clung to the belief that Jake was a man who would stand by her, no matter what. After tearing up the papers, Jake threw them into the trash and turned to Barbara. We're not letting him win. Trust me, Barbara. I've got this under control. Barbara wiped away her tears and nodded slowly, Jake's confidence spreading a small sliver of hope. The tension seemed to ease as Jake poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one toward her. This will help you relax, he said smoothly. Barbara took the glass hesitantly, her mind still racing. Jake leaned in closer, his gaze intense. Let David go. This is your house now, without him. Let's make a statement. Barbara blinked, taken aback. Jake, I don't know. This feels strange. Jake grinned, his confidence unwavering. Strange? No, it's victory. It's us showing David that he doesn't own you anymore. Trust me, you'll thank me for this. His words, his tone, and his unrelenting charisma slowly wore down her resistance. Eventually, she relented, and he swept her into his arms, leading her to the bedroom. The next morning, Jake dressed sharply for work, fixing his tie as he spoke. Don't worry about a thing, babe. I'll cover for you at the office. I'll tell them you're sick and need a couple of days off. I'll also focus on finding a lawyer and putting together a plan to take down your bastard husband. Barbara nodded, still groggy but somewhat reassured by his confidence. Jake kissed her cheek and left for the day, leaving her alone in the house. As the silence settled around her, Barbara stared out the window, holding a cold cup of coffee. Maybe this is for the best, she murmured to herself. To hell with David. I'll have a different life now. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A notification from her bank appeared on the screen. Your account has been frozen. Panic flooded her as she scrambled to log into her banking app. Her heart sank as she saw that the joint savings account had been emptied. All of it, transferred into separate accounts she couldn't access. Frantically, she called David, but the call went to voicemail. Her anxiety grew as each second passed, until her phone finally rang. It was David. Barbara answered with a mix of anger and desperation. "David, what did you do? You froze my account and took our money. You're being a coward. You made a show of handing over documents yesterday, but we need to talk about all this. If you don't, I'm going to be very angry." David's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of disappointment. "Barbara, you made your choice. You'll get your explanations in court. Until then, I'm done discussing anything with you. You can't just—" Barbara began. But David interrupted, his tone firm. "I'm not interested in listening to you anymore. You didn't even bother to call me last night. Address all your questions to my lawyer." The line went dead, leaving Barbara trembling with fury and fear. Desperate for support, she dialed Jake. After a few rings, he answered, his voice unusually dry. Barbara explained what David had done, freezing the bank account and taking all the money. Jake listened calmly before replying. "Barbara, we've got a problem." "What now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "David is a sneaky bastard," Jake said, his tone turning serious. "He's already informed the big bosses at the company. He told them about us, about the affair." Barbara gasped. "What? What did you tell them to justify it?" Jake sighed heavily. "I told them it was a misunderstanding, that your husband is going crazy because of the divorce. I said he's paranoid and trying to ruin both of us out of spite. Did they believe you? The bosses are giving me some leeway. I'm a valuable asset to the company, so they're turning a blind eye for now. But I need to clean this up quickly." Barbara clutched her phone, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" Jake's voice turned sharp and commanding. "I'm looking for a lawyer. I'll involve some influential friends to make sure we win this. But Barbara, I need David's number. I have to talk to him man to man." She hesitated, unsure if giving Jake the number was the right choice. But Jake's confidence reassured her once more. "Okay," she whispered, reciting David's number. Jake jotted it down. "Don't worry," Jake said, his tone softening. "I'll handle this." Barbara hung up, her nerves frayed but holding on to the hope that Jake would keep his promises. Jake paced the floor of his office, his phone pressed to his ear, his hand clenched into a fist as the line connected. The moment he heard David's voice, Jake launched into a tirade. "Listen, you little punk," Jake growled. "You've started a dangerous game, and you don't even realize what you've gotten yourself into. You've crossed all the lines, and now this is personal, a vendetta." David's silence on the other end only fueled Jake's anger. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "But I'm giving you a chance, David. Divorce Barbara without any of your little tricks or schemes, and explain to me why the hell you're talking to my management about me and Barbara. You better fix this, apologize, and admit that it's all a misunderstanding. Do that, and I'll forget about you. Otherwise—" Jake let the threat hang in the air, his tone menacing. David's faint chuckle came through the phone, followed by his calm response. "A bet," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. "That's all I offered you, Jake. A bet in the form of a charitable contribution. Consider it compensation for the damage you helped cause to my marriage. Barbara will bear full responsibility for her choices, and so will you. But you, Jake, your arrogance and impudence, those piss me off." Jake gritted his teeth, barely holding back his fury. "Oh, you think you're clever, huh?" David ignored him and continued, his voice composed but firm. "Here's my last offer, Jake. Make a charitable contribution to my account, $200,000, and I'll ensure your nerves stay calm and your conscience gets a little clearer." Jake's voice exploded in rage. "You think I'm going to roll over and hand you that kind of money? Who the hell do you think you are? I'll crush you like a bug. You hear me? I have real friends, powerful ones. I'll bring in the best damn lawyer money can buy, and you'll regret ever messing with me." David remained unshaken, his tone as composed as ever. "You're welcome to try, Jake," David said coldly. "But mark my words, you'll suffer for every step you've taken. The bets are made, gentlemen." His voice turned icy as he finished. "Goodbye, Jake. I have nothing more to say to you." The call ended abruptly before Jake could throw another insult. Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, muttering curses under his breath. "That smug little bastard," he growled. "He thinks he can play with me." But deep down, a small, nagging voice he refused to acknowledge began to stir. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt the unsettling sting of uncertainty. The first day of the divorce trial erupted in a storm of revelations. David and his lawyer presented a mountain of evidence, photographs, messages, and detailed accounts of Barbara's secret meetings with Jake. Each piece painted a vivid picture of their betrayal. Barbara's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man with a knack for stalling, objected to the immediate admission of the evidence. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "these materials require thorough verification. Until their authenticity can be confirmed, we cannot allow them to unfairly influence the court's proceedings." It was a clever move, buying time for Barbara and Jake. Jake smirked from the gallery, silently commending the lawyer's strategy. Time was exactly what he needed. Time to pressure David to use his connections and resources to make this whole ordeal disappear. When the hearing ended, the judge adjourned the case until the next session. Barbara looked visibly shaken, but Jake reassured her with his usual bravado. "Don't worry, babe, we've got this. Just give me a few more days, and I'll make sure David wishes he'd never messed with us." As Jake wrapped up calls to friends who could help him corner David, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. "Boss?" "Jake," the boss said curtly when he answered. "I need you in my office."
Now.
The line went dead before Jake could respond. Something about the tone of the call suggested trouble. Trouble Jake might not be able to charm his way out of. Jake entered the boss's office, his usual confidence diminished but not entirely gone. The boss, a sharp man who rarely minced words, gestured for Jake to sit. "Jake," the boss began, his tone cold. "Frankly, just for that murky story with Barbara, I should have fired both of you. But I turned a blind eye, believing your explanation, until now." Jake immediately launched into a defense. "Sir, I'm her boss. I couldn't abandon her while her husband's clearly unhinged. There are court hearings coming up, and once that's sorted, everything will calm down." The boss frowned, tapping his fingers on the desk. "We're not here to talk about your personal drama, Jake. I've received some very disturbing information." Jake stiffened, his stomach tightening. "What kind of information?" The boss leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "It seems you've been involved in fraud, mismanaging the company's advertising budget, funneling money into shell companies, and pocketing the difference. The details are extensive." Jake's mouth went dry. "That's ridiculous. I'd never." The boss raised a hand to silence him and pressed a button on his desk phone. Moments later, the head of security walked in, followed by another man in a sharp suit. "This is a friend of mine," the boss said, gesturing to the man. "He works in the department for investigating financial and economic crimes. For now, this investigation will remain unofficial, but we're going to verify everything that's come to light. If it's true, Jake, you're looking at massive fines and possibly a criminal case." Jake stammered, his confidence cracking. "I don't know where this is coming from. Someone's trying to ruin me." The boss tilted his head, scrutinizing him. "By the way, Jake, do you play poker?" Jake froze, the question catching him off guard. No. I mean, not really. Just occasionally for fun." The boss slid a folder across the desk, opening it to reveal photographs. They showed Jake sitting at a poker table in dingy backrooms, surrounded by unsavory characters. "People say you sometimes win, sometimes lose big." Jake's face turned pale as he struggled to form a coherent response. This isn't what it looks like. It's just, I wasn't."
It's harmless.
The boss's expression remained icy. "Harmless, Jake? You've put this company's reputation on the line. From this moment forward, you're under scrutiny. Every move you make, every decision. It's all being monitored." Jake left the office under the watchful eye of a security guard, his mind racing. Back in his own office, he collapsed into his chair, clutching his head in despair. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. A message from David. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Confidence." Jake slammed the phone down on his desk, frustration boiling over. Moments later, it buzzed again. This time a call from Barbara. "Jake," she began, her voice filled with worry. "Can we meet for dinner and discuss an action plan? We need to figure out what to do, Jake." Barbara's voice trembled, desperation in her tone. Jake, his patience at its breaking point, snapped back. "I'm not going to solve other people's problems, Barbara. Figure it out yourself. Why the hell did you even drag me into this mess?" "Jake, please," she pleaded, but he cut her off, his voice cold. "I have more important things to deal with.
Bye."
Without hesitation, he hung up and blocked her number. Barbara sat on the edge of her bed, her face buried in her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. The weight of her decisions crushed her. She had lost everything. David, Jake, and even the life she had once taken for granted. Just days after Jake's betrayal, Barbara received devastating news. She was being fired. Her boss cited the public scandal, explaining that the company couldn't afford the damage her drama had caused to its reputation. On the same day, she learned that Jake was under investigation for financial fraud at work. Her divorce case concluded swiftly and brutally, with David's overwhelming evidence ensuring she received nothing. No assets, no financial support, only the legal fees for her own lawyer. Desperate, Barbara had to take out a loan to cover her debts. Eventually, she secured a new job, but it was a far cry from her previous position. Her salary was modest, and her responsibilities tedious. Every day, she was reminded of how far she had fallen, and every night, she cried herself to sleep. Jake, once brimming with confidence and charm, now sat in his small, disheveled apartment. His lawyer had warned him that the fines for his fraud were just the beginning. Jail time was likely. He stared at the evidence David had amassed, realizing the thoroughness of the investigation. The truth was undeniable. David had uncovered not just his affair with Barbara, but also the fraudulent shell companies and embezzlement schemes Jake had orchestrated. Jake's darker side had been fully exposed, with the Rayall investigation beginning after David's anonymous tip. His rage toward David burned hot, but there was nothing he could do. David had outplayed him, and Jake knew it. Meanwhile, David sat in the quiet comfort of his parents' ranch, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He thought back to William, the private detective he had hired. The man had been worth every penny, collecting overwhelming evidence not only against Barbara but also Jake. It had been an expensive endeavor, but for David, honor and dignity were priceless. Now free from the weight of betrayal, he focused on what truly mattered: family and rebuilding his life. He had no need to gloat or seek further revenge. He had already won. As he watched the sun set over the horizon, David felt a sense of peace. He was ready to leave the past behind and start anew. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Robert Riley's key turned in the lock, the soft click echoing through the silent foyer of his lavish mansion. The 45-year-old executive's brow furrowed as he stepped inside, the absence of his wife Letitia immediately apparent. "Letitia," he called out, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. No response. He dropped his suitcase by the door, his eyes scanning the immaculate living room. Something was off. A tie not his was draped carelessly over the back of an armchair. He picked it up, bringing it to his nose. An unfamiliar cologne clung to the silk, musky and expensive. Robert's jaw clenched as he made his way through the house, noting small inconsistencies. A wine glass with a lipstick stain in the sink, a throw pillow out of place on the couch. Each detail added to the growing knot in his stomach. In the bedroom, he unpacked methodically, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone, dialing Letitia's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Nothing. With a growl of frustration, Robert began calling Letitia's friends. Each conversation left him more unsettled than the last. "Oh, Robert." Letitia mentioned something about a spa retreat. Sarah, her yoga buddy, said with a nervous laugh. 10 minutes later, Jennifer, another friend, told him, "I think she said something about visiting a sick aunt. I'm not sure the details." Their hesitation, the conflicting stories, it all reeked of deception. Robert's knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone, forcing his voice to remain calm as he thanked them and ended the calls. A methodical search of the house turned up nothing until he reached Letitia's vanity. Tucked away in a drawer, beneath a tangle of silk scarves, he found a receipt. His eyes narrowed as he read the itemized list: an outrageously expensive lingerie set, purchased on a date that coincided perfectly with his last business trip. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his dark thoughts. Robert composed himself before answering, finding Mrs. Rosalie Dawson, their 65-year-old neighbor, on the porch. "Mr. Riley, I'm so glad you're back," she said, wringing her hands. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know. There's been an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside your house several times this week, always when you're away." Robert's blood ran cold. but he managed a tight smile. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Dawson. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." As soon as he closed the door, Robert's calm facade crumbled. He stormed through the house, tearing through drawers and closets. In Letitia's study, hidden behind a row of untouched classics, he found a sleek, expensive burner phone. The device was password protected, a final barrier between Robert and the truth he already knew in his gut. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen, barely recognizing the hard-eyed stranger staring back at him. Robert's fingers flew across his phone's keypad, muscle memory dialing a number he rarely used but always kept close. "Tim, it's Robert. I need your help." No questions asked. Within an hour, Tim Stafford arrived, looking every bit the socially awkward IT genius he was. His arms were laden with equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie rather than a suburban home. "What's the situation, boss?" Tim asked, already setting up his laptop on the kitchen island. Robert's explanation was terse, stripped of emotion. He laid out the facts, the mysterious absences, the conflicting stories, the burner phone. Tim listened intently, nodding occasionally as his fingers flew over the keyboard. "We're going to turn this place into a digital fortress," Tim declared. "Every room, every angle. Nothing will escape our notice." They worked through the night, installing cutting-edge surveillance equipment throughout the house. Cameras in the bedroom, living areas, and all entry points. Microphones hidden in strategic locations. By dawn, Robert had access to a command center that would make intelligence agencies envious. As Tim packed up his gear, Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "I owe you one, Tim." The smaller man shook his head. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. We're even." He hesitated at the door. "Robert, whatever you find, be careful, okay?" Robert's smile was cold. "Always am, Tim. Always am." Alone again, Robert set his plan in motion. He crafted a convincing story about an emergency business meeting in Tokyo, complete with hastily booked flights and a hotel reservation. When he texted Letitia the news, her response was almost instantaneous, a flurry of concerned emojis and promises to hold down the fort. When Letitia returned home, Robert watched her on the newly installed cameras. He noted the fleeting look of relief that crossed her face at the mention of his impending trip. It vanished quickly, replaced by a well-practiced expression of wifely concern. As Robert pretended to pack, he caught Letitia slipping into the garden, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was too low to make out the words, but her body language spoke volumes. Furtive glances, nervous gestures. When she noticed him watching from the window, she ended the call abruptly, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert kissed her goodbye, the act of tenderness feeling like ash in his mouth. He drove to the airport, parked his car in long-term parking, and took a cab to a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of town. The room was bland, forgettable. Perfect. He set up his laptop, linking to the surveillance feed. And then Robert Riley settled in to watch his marriage implode. The hotel room clock read 9:47 p.m. when headlights swept across the front of the house on Robert's laptop screen. He leaned forward, every muscle in his body coiled tight as a spring. A sleek black SUV matching Mrs. Dawson's description perfectly pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened, and Robert's world crumbled. Santiago Lutz stepped out, his confident stride unmistakable even in the grainy footage. Robert's longtime business rival, the man who'd tried to undercut him at every turn for over a decade. But Santiago wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the vehicle, Andre Ackerman and Herbert Stark. Robert recognized them instantly as Santiago's most trusted associates. All three men cut imposing figures, their expensive suits doing little to hide their athletic builds. Robert's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated attack on everything he held dear. The front door opened before they could knock. Letitia stood framed in the doorway, a vision in red lace that made Robert's stomach churn. It was the lingerie set from the receipt He realized with a sickening lurch. She bought it for them. For this debauchery. He watched, bile rising in his throat, as his wife welcomed the three men with the enthusiasm of a long-lost lover. No, not lover. Lovers. Plural. What unfolded over the next few hours seared itself into Robert's brain. The sounds of ecstasy, the tangle of limbs, the utter betrayal of every vow they'd ever made. He forced himself to keep watching, to document every sordid detail. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. This was about burning away any lingering shred of affection or trust. As the night wore on, Robert's initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger. He listened as they made plans for future rendezvous, always carefully timed to coincide with his business trips. This wasn't a one-time indiscretion. This was a well-oiled machine, a conspiracy designed to cuckold him in his own home. Next Friday works perfectly, Letitia purred, running her fingers through Santiago's hair. Robert has that conference in Chicago. Santiago chuckled, a sound that set Robert's teeth on edge. Excellent. I'll bring the champagne. You supply the entertainment. By the time dawn broke, Robert Riley was a changed man. The successful but ultimately trusting husband was dead, replaced by something harder, colder, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain through merciless retribution. He checked out of the hotel, his movements precise and controlled. To anyone watching, he was just another businessman starting his day. They couldn't see the storm raging behind his eyes, the wheels of vengeance already turning in his mind. As he drove home, Robert's mind raced with possibilities. Santiago, Letitia, Andre, Herbert, they had no idea what was coming. But Robert did, and he would make sure that when he was done, they would wish they had never crossed Robert Riley. Robert Riley's fingers drummed a steady rhythm on his mahogany desk, his eyes fixed on the business card before him. Faith Montgomery, private investigator. He'd vetted her thoroughly, discreet, sharp, and with a reputation for getting results no matter the cost. Perfect. He dialed a number, his voice clipped and professional when she answered. Ms. Montgomery? Robert Riley. I have a job for you. It's delicate, it's complex, and it needs to be handled with the utmost discretion. Faith's response was equally businesslike. I understand, Mr. Riley. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss the details. An hour later, they sat in a nondescript cafe, well away from Robert's usual haunts. Faith was younger than he'd expected, barely 35, but her eyes held a hardness that spoke of experience beyond her years. Robert laid out the situation, his words precise and emotionless. He watched Faith's expression carefully, noting the slight widening of her eyes when he mentioned Santiago Lutz. Santiago Lutz, Faith mused, tapping her pen against her notepad. He's got a reputation in certain circles. Not all of it good. Robert leaned forward, his voice low and intense. I want everything, Miss Montgomery. Every skeleton in his closet, every dirty deal, every indiscretion. Leave no stone unturned. Faith nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Consider it done, Mr. Riley. I'll be in touch. Over the next few weeks, Robert threw himself into his work with a fervor that surprised even his most ambitious colleagues. To the outside world, he was a man on a mission to grow his empire. In reality, every move was calculated to bring Santiago's world crashing down around him. Faith's reports came in regularly, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with suspiciously similar board members, a pattern of bribes and kickbacks that stretched back years. Robert pored over the information, meticulously connecting the dots. He worked late into the night, fueled by a combination of expensive scotch and cold fury. The Robert of a month ago would have balked at the idea of destroying a man's life and career. That Robert was dead, replaced by a creature of pure, ruthless ambition. Using an anonymous email account, Robert crafted a masterpiece of innuendo and partially revealed truths. Just enough to pique the interest of the SEC, not enough to show his full hand. He hit send with a smile, imagining the storm that was about to break over Santiago's head. In the office, Robert was the picture of professionalism. He outbid Santiago on a crucial contract with a smile and a handshake, all while imagining the look on his rival's face when it all came crashing down. "Tough luck, Santiago," Robert said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe next time, eh?" Santiago's grip was too tight as they shook hands. "Always a pleasure doing business with you, Robert. Give my best to Letitia, won't you?" It took every ounce of Robert's self-control not to punch the smug bastard right there in the boardroom. The final piece of his plan fell into place at a charity gala. Robert had done his homework. He knew exactly which causes Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, was passionate about. It was child's play to engineer a chance meeting by the champagne fountain. Gabriella was everything her husband wasn't: warm, genuine, with a quick wit that Robert found himself genuinely enjoying. He pushed away the pang of guilt that threatened to surface. This wasn't about Gabriella. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. "It's so refreshing to meet someone who actually cares about these causes," Gabriella said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Sometimes I think half the people here are just for the free champagne and photo ops." Robert laughed, the sound almost foreign to his ears after weeks of determination. "Well, I won't say no to good champagne, but you're right. There are more important things in life than the bottom line." As they parted ways, Robert couldn't help but notice the way Gabriella's eyes lingered on him. He filed the information away, another potential weapon in his arsenal. The SEC audit hit Santiago's company like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Robert watched from the sidelines, his face a mask of polite concern as the business world buzzed with speculation. Santiago's usual swagger was noticeably absent at the next industry event. His collar seemed too tight, his smile strained as he glad-handed his way through the crowd. Robert approached, armed with a flute of champagne and faux sympathy. "Rough time, Santiago?" he asked, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "These audits can be such a headache. If there's anything I can do to help." Santiago's eyes flashed with a mixture of suspicion and barely contained rage. "I don't need your help, Riley. This is nothing but a minor inconvenience. Will be cleared in no time." Robert raised his glass in a mock toast. "Of course." I never doubted it for a moment. As he turned away, Robert allowed himself a small, cold smile. The noose was tightening, and Santiago could feel it. At home, Letitia was becoming increasingly agitated. Robert caught her scrutinizing their bank statements, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Darling," she said one evening, her voice carefully neutral, "I've noticed some irregularities in our accounts. Is everything all right with the business?" Robert put on a show of concern, internally marveling at her audacity. The woman who had been bleeding their accounts dry for months now had the nerve to question him. "Oh, what kind of irregularities?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the statement. Letitia pointed to several large transfers. "They're substantial." Robert furrowed his brow, the picture of a concerned husband. You're right, that is odd. I'll have to speak with our accountant. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, dear. I don't know what I'd do without you watching out for us." The kiss he placed on her cheek felt like acid on his lips. As the weeks wore on, Robert noticed a change in Letitia's behavior. Her phone calls became more frantic, always taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. He didn't need to check the surveillance footage to know that her rendezvous with Santiago and his cronies had all but ceased. One particularly tense evening, Robert accidentally overheard a snippet of conversation as he passed by Letitia's study. "What do you mean you can't make it?" she hissed into the phone. "Andre, you promised. I need—" "No, you don't understand. Robert's been asking questions about the accounts. I think he suspects something." Robert allowed himself a smile as he continued down the hallway. The rats were starting to abandon the sinking ship. His friendship with Gabriella was progressing nicely. They met for coffee under the guise of discussing charity work. But Robert could see the growing doubt in her eyes when she spoke of Santiago. "He's been so distant lately," Gabriella confided during one such meeting. Always working late, barely speaking to me when he is home. I can't help but feel like he's hiding something. Robert reached out, placing a comforting hand over hers. I'm sure it's just the stress of the audit. But Gabriella, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. The grateful smile she gave him almost made him feel guilty. Almost. The final nail in Santiago's coffin came in the form of a carefully curated photo leak. Robert had agonized over this move, knowing it would hurt Gabriella as much as Santiago. But in the end, his thirst for revenge won out. The photos hit the tabloids like a bomb. Santiago Lutz, respected businessman, caught in compromising positions with not one, but several women. None of them his wife, and notably, none of them Letitia. Robert had been careful about that he wasn't ready to show his full hand just yet. The business world exploded with scandal. Santiago's already shaky reputation crumbled. And in their lavish home, Gabriella Lutz stared at the headlines with tears in her eyes, reaching for her phone to call the one person she thought she could trust. Robert bided his time, watching as Letitia grew more frantic with each passing day. Her lovers had abandoned her. Her spending habits were under scrutiny, and her carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling around her. He chose his moment carefully. Letitia had just ended yet another tense phone call, her face pale and drawn as she paced the living room. Robert stepped in, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Rough day, dear?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Letitia whirled to face him, her eyes wide with poorly concealed panic. "Robert, I didn't hear you come in. It's nothing. Just some drama with the girls from the club." Robert nodded slowly, moving to pour himself a drink. The clink of ice against glass was the only sound for a long moment. "Funny," he said finally. "I could have sworn I heard Santiago's name mentioned. And Andre's. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't those Santiago Lutz's associates? Odd company for your club friends to keep, wouldn't you say?" The color drained from Letitia's face. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have misheard." Robert took a slow sip of his scotch, savoring the burn as much as the fear growing in Letitia's eyes. "Oh, I don't think I did. In fact, I think I've been hearing things quite clearly for some time now. The question is, Letitia, how long did you think you could keep this charade going?" Letitia's demeanor changed in an instant, fear replaced by defensive anger. "What are you implying, Robert? I've been nothing but faithful to you." A harsh laugh escaped Robert's lips. "Faithful? Is that what you call fucking my business rival and his associates in our bed? Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your little escapades?" He pulled out his phone, queuing up the damning footage from that first night of surveillance. Letitia's face crumpled as she watched herself writhing in ecstasy, Santiago and his friends taking turns with her like she was nothing more than a toy to be passed around. How did you?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's voice was ice cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting, to see what was happening right under my nose?" Letitia's shock quickly turned to anger. She drew herself up, eyes flashing. "You were never here. Always working. Always on some business trip. What did you expect me to do? Sit at home like a good little wife?" "I expected you to honor our vows," Robert spat. "I expected basic human decency and respect. Clearly, that was too much to ask." Letitia's lips curled into a sneer. "Fine. You want a divorce? You've got one. I'll take you for everything you're worth, Robert. Half of everything we own is mine by law." For the first time since the confrontation began, Robert smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Oh, Leticia, you really should have paid more attention to the financial documents I asked you to sign last month." He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase. "You see, our assets aren't quite as joint as you might think. And as for your little spending sprees, well, let's just say the paper trail leads directly back to you. Embezzlement is such an ugly word, isn't it? Letitia's face went from angry to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. You can't do this. I'll fight you. You'll what? Robert cut her off. Go to Santiago for help. I'm afraid he has his own problems to deal with right now. The SEC is quite interested in some of his business practices. Practices that, coincidentally, you seem to have some knowledge of, given the nature of your pillow talk. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Face it, Letitia. It's over. You played a dangerous game and you lost. I'd start packing if I were you. The locks will be changed by morning. As Robert turned to leave, Letitia's voice stopped him. How long? She asked, her voice small and defeated. How long have you known? Robert paused at the door, not bothering to turn around. Long enough to make sure that when I was done, you'd have nothing left. Not money, not reputation, not even the man you threw away our marriage for. Goodbye, Letitia. I'd say it's been a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. The door closed behind him with a final, devastating click. In the silent aftermath, Letitia sank to her knees, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. And in his study, Robert Riley poured himself another drink, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction before turning his attention to the next phase of his plan. Santiago Lutz wouldn't know what hit him. Letitia's manicured nails drummed an erratic rhythm on the polished surface of Santiago's desk. Her eyes, once sparkling with mischief and desire, now held the desperate gleam of a cornered animal. We have to do something, Santiago, she hissed, her voice raw with panic. Robert knows everything. He's going to destroy us both. Santiago Lutz, the once imposing business tycoon, looked a shadow of his former self. Dark circles marred the skin under his eyes, and a slight tremor in his hands betrayed the strain of the past weeks. Calm down, Letitia, he snapped, though his own voice lacked its usual confidence. Panicking won't solve anything. We need a plan. Letitia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if we made people think Robert was losing it? You know, mentally unstable? Santiago's eyes narrowed, a spark of his old cunning flaring to life. Go on. Think about it. Letitia pressed, warming to her theme. If everyone believes Robert's gone off the deep end, anything he says about us will be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. A slow, cruel smile spread across Santiago's face. Letitia, my dear, I always said you were more than just a pretty face. They spent the next hour plotting, their heads bent close together over Santiago's desk. By the time Letitia left, a plan had taken shape, a desperate, ruthless gambit to salvage their reputations and discredit Robert Riley once and for all. Santiago wasted no time putting their scheme into action. He reached out to his media contacts, calling in favors and making thinly veiled threats where necessary. Within days, the first whispers began to circulate. Did you hear about Robert Riley? I heard he had some kind of breakdown at the office. My cousin's friend works for him, says he's been acting really paranoid lately. The rumors spread like wildfire, each retelling adding new, lurid details. Robert's alleged erratic behavior and paranoid delusions became the talk of the business world, with speculation running rampant about the cause of his supposed mental decline. Meanwhile, Letitia and Santiago weren't content to rely solely on rumor and innuendo. They needed hard evidence to back up their claims, something that would irreparably damage Robert's credibility. We need to get into his accounts, Letitia insisted during one of their clandestine meetings. There has to be something we can use against him. Santiago nodded, already pulling out his phone. I know a guy, hacker, best in the business. If there's dirt to be found, he'll find it. What neither of them realized was that they were playing right into Robert's hands. The cybersecurity measures Tim had put in place were far beyond anything their hired hacker had ever encountered. Every attempt to breach Robert's defenses not only failed, but left a clear trail leading right back to Santiago and Letitia. Frustrated by their lack of progress and growing increasingly desperate, Letitia decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to Julie Brock, Robert's ex-girlfriend from before their marriage. The cafe Letitia chose for their meeting was deliberately nondescript, the kind of place that discouraged lingering glances or eavesdropping. Julie arrived precisely on time, her face a mask of polite curiosity. "Thank you for meeting me, Julie," Letitia began, her voice honey-sweet. "I'm worried about Robert, and I hoped you might be able to help." Julie's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Oh, and how exactly am I supposed to do that?" Letitia leaned in, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "Cut the act. You dated Robert for what? 2 years? There must be something you know, something we can use to show he's not as stable as he pretends to be." Julie's laugh was sharp and without humor. "Let me get this straight. You want me to help you destroy the reputation of a man I once cared deeply for, all to save your own skin." She stood, gathering her purse. "I think we're done here." As Julie walked away, Letitia felt the last threads of her plan unraveling. She didn't notice the small smile playing at the corners of Julie's mouth, or the way her hand moved to her pocket, where a recording device had captured every damning word. Across town, Santiago was making his own desperate play. He had arranged a meeting with Tim Stafford, Robert's loyal IT expert, at an upscale bar known for its discretion. "Mr. Stafford," Santiago greeted, all oily charm and forced camaraderie. "Thank you for meeting me. Can I get you a drink?" Tim's face remained impassive. "I'll pass, thanks." "What's this about, Mr. Lutz?" Santiago's smile faltered slightly at Tim's cool demeanor. He pressed on regardless. "I'll be blunt, Mr. Stafford. I'm concerned about Robert. His behavior lately has been erratic. As his friend and colleague, I'm sure you've noticed it too." Tim said nothing, his silence forcing Santiago to fill the void. "I'm prepared to make it worth your while," Santiago continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $500,000. All you have to do is testify about Robert's unstable behavior at work. For his own good, you understand." The silence stretched between them, Santiago's forced smile growing strained. Finally, Tim spoke. "Are you finished, Mr. Lutz?" Santiago blinked, thrown off balance. What?" Tim stood, his voice cold. "Because if you are, I'd like to say this. Robert Riley is 10 times the man you'll ever be. He gave me a chance when no one else would, and I'd sooner cut off my own hand than betray him." He leaned in close, his next words barely above a whisper. "Oh, and in case you're wondering, this entire conversation has been recorded. I'm sure Robert will be very interested to hear it." As Tim walked away, leaving a shell-shocked Santiago in his wake, the last pillars of the plan to discredit Robert came crashing down. Unbeknownst to either Santiago or Letitia, their desperate attempts to save themselves had only served to seal their own fates. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from every major network and publication jostled for position. Cameras at the ready. The air crackled with the electric tension that precedes a major story. At precisely 2 p.m., Robert Riley strode onto the small stage. He looked every inch the successful businessman, impeccably tailored suit, not a hair out of place. But there was something in his eyes, a steely determination that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, his voice steady and clear, "I've called this press conference to address the recent rumors concerning my mental health and business practices." A susurrus of whispers swept through the room. In the back, Santiago Lutz shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "I'm aware that there have been questions about my stability," Robert continued. "Allegations of erratic behavior, paranoid delusions. I'm here today to put those rumors to rest." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "But first, I'd like to present some information that I think you'll find illuminating." With a nod to an assistant, a series of documents appeared on the large screen behind him. Bank statements, emails, surveillance photos, a damning tapestry of evidence pointing to years of fraudulent business practices. "What you're looking at," Robert explained, his voice taking on an edge of steel, is proof of a complex money laundering scheme orchestrated by none other than Santiago Lutz. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. In the back, Santiago's face had gone ashen. Robert held up a hand, quieting the crowd. I understand you have questions about my mental state. Allow me to address those concerns. He produced a stack of papers, holding them up to the cameras. I have here sworn statements from my colleagues, medical evaluations from top psychiatrists, and video evidence showcasing my competency and the calculated nature of my recent actions. As Robert systematically dismantled every allegation against him, Santiago felt the noose tightening. He edged towards the door, only to find his path blocked by two stern-faced security guards. But Robert wasn't finished. I'd like to invite a special guest to join me on stage. Julie Brock, if you would. Julie emerged from the wings, her head held high. Santiago's eyes widened in recognition. The ex-girlfriend Letitia had tried to turn against Robert. Ms. Brock has been working with me to uncover the truth, Robert explained. She has evidence that will put to rest any lingering doubts about the nature of these false allegations against me. Julie stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering as she recounted her meeting with Letitia, playing the damning recording for all to hear. The final blow came with another gesture from Robert. There's one more person I'd like you all to hear from. Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, walked onto the stage. Her face was a mask of composure, but her eyes blazed with a mixture of pain and fury. Gabriella, Robert said gently, I'm sorry to have to do this, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. He handed her a folder. These are photos and records detailing your husband's multiple affairs, including his relationship with my soon-to-be ex-wife, Letitia. Gabriella's hands shook as she looked through the contents. When she lifted her head, her voice was steel. I'd like to make a statement, she said, facing the sea of cameras. I am hereby announcing my intention to file for divorce from Santiago Lutz. Furthermore, I fully support any investigation into his business practices. The press conference ended in a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. As security led a shell-shocked Santiago away in handcuffs, Robert made one final announcement. In light of recent events, I've decided to donate a significant portion of my assets to a charity supporting victims of fraud and infidelity. It's my hope that some good can come from this unfortunate situation. The room erupted in applause, Robert's masterful performance leaving no doubt as to who had emerged victorious in this high-stakes game. The consequences of Robert's revelation rippled through the business world like a tsunami. Within hours, Santiago Lutz found himself in a stark interrogation room, the weight of his crimes pressing down on him like a physical force. His high-priced lawyers, usually so confident and commanding, looked as if they'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their faces grave. Mr. Lutz, the evidence against you is overwhelming, the lead attorney said, his voice heavy with resignation. Given the circumstances, we strongly advise you to consider a plea deal. Santiago's world had narrowed to this moment. The realization that his empire of lies and fraud was crumbling around him. He nodded numbly, the fight gone out of him. Do what you have to do, he muttered. Across town, Letitia faced her own reckoning. She stood in the foyer of what had once been her home, a single suitcase at her feet. The locks had already been changed, a final, irrevocable sign that her life of luxury was over. Her phone buzzed incessantly calls from so-called friends, no doubt eager to distance themselves from the scandal. She ignored them all, knowing that her social circle had contracted to a cold, empty void. With nowhere else to go, Letitia found herself in a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. The kind of place she would have turned her nose up at just days ago. Now, it was all she could afford, as she sat on a lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained walls. The full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her reputation, her future, and lost it all in spectacular fashion. Meanwhile, Andre and Herbert, Santiago's once loyal associates, were scrambling to save themselves. They'd seen the writing on the wall and wasted no time in turning state's evidence. In sterile interrogation rooms, they spilled every secret, every shady deal, every whispered conversation. Their testimonies were a final nail in Santiago's coffin, revealing the true extent of his criminal network. Gabriella Lutz, shell-shocked but resilient, threw herself into the divorce proceedings with determination. She wanted nothing more to do with the man she had once loved, the man who had betrayed her so completely. In a moment of vulnerability, she reached out to the one person who had shown her true kindness throughout this ordeal. Robert. Her voice wavered slightly over the phone. I just wanted to thank you for telling me the truth, as painful as it was. Robert's response was gentle, understanding. You deserve to know, Gabriella. I'm just sorry it had to be this way. A pause, pregnant with possibility. Perhaps, when the dust settles, we could get coffee sometime. In his office, Robert allowed himself a small smile. I'd like that, Gabriella. I'd like that very much. As the days turned to weeks, Robert watched with satisfaction as the pieces fell into place. His divorce from Letitia was settled swiftly and decisively in his favor. Santiago Lutz, once the titan of industry, was reduced to a jumpsuit-clad defendant, his empire dismantled brick by brick. To the outside world, Robert Riley was the picture of triumph, the wronged husband who had exposed a web of deceit and emerged stronger for it. His donation to the charity for victims of fraud and infidelity was lauded in the press, his reputation not just salvaged but burnished to a high shine. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the accolades faded, Robert felt something. Not regret, certainly. He would make the same choices again in a heartbeat. But a weight, perhaps. The knowledge that he had looked into the abyss of human nature and not flinched away. It was this feeling that led him to the offices of Dr. Perry Dawson, renowned psychiatrist, not out of any sense of guilt or need for absolution, but out of a pragmatic desire to process his experiences and move forward. Mr. Riley, Dr. Dawson greeted him, his voice neutral and professional. What brings you here today? Robert settled into the leather armchair, his posture relaxed but alert. Doctor, I've just dismantled the lives of several people who betrayed me. I don't regret it for a moment, but I find myself curious about the experience, about my own reactions to it. Dr. Dawson nodded, his pen poised over a notepad. I see. And how would you characterize those reactions? A thoughtful pause. Satisfaction, certainly. A sense of justice served. But also a certain coldness, a distance from the person I used to be. And how do you feel about that distance? Robert's smile was sharp, devoid of warmth. I think, Doctor, that's what I'm here to figure out. As the session continued, Robert Riley began the process of examining the man he had become, not with any desire to change or soften the hard edges he had developed, but to understand them, to hone them. Outside the window, the city bustled on, unaware of the quiet reckoning taking place within the confines of Dr. Dawson's office. Robert Riley, the man who had looked betrayal in the eye and emerged victorious, was charting his course for the future, a future where he would never again be the trusting fool, but the master of his own destiny.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Ben Brown, and I'm a 29-year-old computer engineer. I'm also a part owner of a small chain of used car dealerships, which my older and younger brothers manage. I live in California with my girlfriend of 3 years, Kathy Smith. We met when I first moved here, and she helped me find an apartment back when she was working at a real estate agency. Now, she's working for a law firm and studying to become a lawyer. I'm not the most social person and don't have any friends here. My only close friend, Mike, lives in Springfield, so we don't see each other often. Mike has a 3-year-old daughter who demands all his time and attention, and honestly, I wish I had a little girl who would do the same for me. With Kathy by my side, I was looking forward to building a happy future. She's always been open and made a point of including me in everything. Since we started dating, she's asked me to drive her to her girls' nights out, and I've ended up joining them on more than one occasion. Most of her friends are either lifelong friends or people she's known for over 20 years. So, life seemed pretty great. Between my job and the income from the car dealerships, I was making about $100,000 a year. I drove a BMW, and Kathy drove a Porsche. I was surprised when, one night, I spotted her car while driving home from work. She had told me she was spending time with a colleague who was feeling down, and the thought of going back to an empty house on a Friday night wasn't appealing, so I spent the evening with Mike, his wife Rose, and their daughter Maria instead. I stopped at a jeweler's shop on my way back and bought the biggest stone that I could afford. It was time that I made Kathy mine to hold and cherish for the rest of my life. When I saw her car driving in front of me, I thought it was nice that the two of us would reach home together. I intended to start pampering her as soon as we got in the house and would make sure that when we came out of the house in the morning on Monday, we would be engaged to be married. Not that I had any doubts that she would say yes. She, however, seemed to have other plans and made a left about a mile before our exit. I do not know why, but I followed. It could just have been a reflex on my part. Her car stopped at the sidewalk and a tall, well-dressed man got down from the car. After taking a step away from the door, he leaned and took a handkerchief from his pocket and handed her from the window. I could see her putting the handkerchief in the dashboard as she blew him a kiss and drove off. As she stopped in front of a video rental, I drove past her and saw her taking a video from the dashboard and walking into the shop. It was late in the night, and I do not think she noticed me. I thought nothing of the man in the car with her, as it could be anyone who she agreed to drop on her way home. For all I know, he could be the husband of her friend who was feeling down. I reached home, and in about half an hour I heard her coming in. We had a light dinner, and then we retired to the bedroom. She went into the bathroom as I settled in for the night. She came back several minutes later wearing only a black lacy top and black thong. We ended up having sex. We slept late next morning, and it was close to noon when we woke up. I was the first to get up. As I got up, I saw her sleeping beside me. Her face was partially covered with hair, and she had a calm angel-like feel on her face. I walked up to my laptop and opened up my diary. I wrote in there how happy I felt today, and I also wrote about my plans for the evening. That reminded me. My plans needed the right ambience, and I had no candles in the house. I also wanted to buy some flowers and maybe something special for her. I rushed out so that I could buy the stuff I needed and got back home before she woke up. I found that my car had a flat tire, and I need to borrow her car. I hated this. Her car was too girly for me to be comfortable. I got in and drove to the supermarket. After shopping hastily, I got back in the car and drove back. I opened the dashboard looking for a napkin to wipe my hands. I saw a piece of cloth and, remembering the handkerchief from last night, took it out to wipe my hands with it. It was not a handkerchief. It was a soft satin thong. I recognized the thong immediately. It was one that we bought for our trip to Bali. So, if this was what the man handed to her, I could not think of anything. My mind was going numb. I felt my whole world crashing around me. I just sat there thoughtless. I was not angry, not hurt, and not thinking. There might be an explanation for his, was the first thought that came to my mind, but then I dismissed it. I have not handled any thongs ever that did not mean sex. As I drove home, I knew that all plans for my proposals had to be kept on hold. I could not walk into a marriage with doubts in my mind. Doubt is a horrible thing. It basically destroys relationships even when it is unfounded. As I drove into the garage, I could feel a surge of emotions. I was hurting. I was hurting bad. I needed this to be resolved fast. As I entered the apartment, I heard her speak over the phone. I cannot meet you tonight. I have just found out that Ben has plans for us this evening that are more important than me meeting you. After a brief silence, I heard her speak. Of course I love you more than I love Ben. But let us admit, you are not going to divorce that wife of yours, and I am not going to spend my life being a rich man's side piece. I wish that I could be with you always instead of this loser. He does not even recognize the fact that I might need some rough loving. Last night he was all mushy and romantic. I did not enjoy. I pretended. I am not a cold woman. I just do not love it when he is making love to me. Yet, I will say yes to marry him when he asks me tonight. This is unless you can find it in you to leave your wife and take me to be yours, the way I want it. I have had enough of this. There was just one fact. She was cheating on me. This was end of life as I knew it. I slammed the door so that she would know I had come. She simply put the phone down and walked up to me and kissed me as I entered the kitchen. Then she told me that she was going to take a bath and asked me to prepare the breakfast. I walked to the phone and picked it up and hit the redial button as soon as she was out of the kitchen. A lady answered the call, and I told her that this was a call from the phone company and that there was a fault in the phone lines and lots of complaints had been received. We were just checking if the phones were working fine because we would not want anyone charged for phone calls not made by them due to this mix-up. She thanked the phone company for taking care of this. Some small talk later, I had her phone number. Now I knew that he lived within a few miles from my house due to the area code. He must have lived near the place she dropped him. When she came out of the bathroom, I was still sitting in the kitchen, although the breakfast wasn't ready. I wasn't ready either to confront her. It had to be done in the right manner, at the right time. I was just too lost in thought when she said, "What's gotten into you?" Did you hear a word of what I said? I told her that I was distracted and told her a sob story about one of my classmates being in a fatal car accident and how I came to know of it today when I called up my brother. She said that she understood me. I just sat there thinking how wrong she was. She never understood me, or else she would not go around doing what she did. I passed the day sitting in a corner moping and feeling sorry for myself. By the time evening came, I was feeling sorry for her. She did not come from a very rich family, but had gotten used to a lavish lifestyle due to my money. She was going to lose that, and she had already lost me. It was then it dawned on me. She had one thing more to lose, her lover boy. All I had to do was make sure that she lost him, and then letting her know I knew would be better. She would be all alone. I knew that she would have all her friends, and they would give her some support. I made a few phone calls early next day and made an astounding discovery. The phone number belonged to a certain Roger Jones, husband of her friend Samantha. This was going to hurt her more than I thought. She might just end up losing her friends too. I was sorry for Samantha, though. She was the sweetest person you could meet. I remember one time when I was really sick and Kathy was out of town, Samantha had made a trip twice a day for a week to ensure that I was well fed and taken care of. Since that time, I saw her as my younger sister. We even joked about it when we met. Being very shy, I actually had not tried to befriend her too much, but I always felt good about seeing her around. I sleepwalked the whole day, and at the end of the day, I gave my 2 weeks' notice to the company, letting them know I was quitting because I was planning on moving back home and not intended to stay on in California beyond the next month. My boss was shocked and offered me a raise and even promised to talk about a promotion with the management. He said I was too good an employee to lose for any reason. Next, I went and met Mike and told him what had transpired. I pulled no punches in giving him the details of what I knew. He was very understanding and gave me the right advice. Forget revenge and walk away. In my efforts to hurt Kathy, I would be hurt too. I knew that, but I knew any hurt would not pain as much as I pained right now. I knew that I was going to make Kathy regret what she had done to me. I reached home late in the evening to find that Kathy had not returned. I installed a key logging software on her computer and then took out the audio recording device and planted them in each of the rooms and then bugged the telephone so that I could monitor what was going on. All of it was being recorded in my laptop. All that I needed to hook up to my laptop was a small dongle that looked almost like a Bluetooth dongle. It was the receiver for all the microphones and recorded each microphone in a separate file. It was all very complicated, but for someone who was born to play with computers and gadgets, it was no big deal. I also installed a high-resolution video camera overseeing our bed. I was all set up by midnight and Kathy was still not home. She came in around 1 in the morning and was surprised to find me still awake. I acted normal and told her that I had a bit of surprise for her this weekend. I let her know that I was planning a party this weekend and I had an important announcement to make. She obviously thought that I was going to propose to her in front of the whole crowd and make a lot of fuss about it. She ought to have known me better. I am a very private person and would have done nothing of the sort. I asked her to invite all her friends in the party and also informed her that I had already invited her folks over for the party. I was not going to take any prisoners. People were going to get hurt, and I wanted her to be blamed for everything. Then I informed her that I was going away for a day the next morning and would not be back till following morning. Just as soon as I went to the shower, she called up Roger. As I came out of the bathroom, I saw her hanging up. I later heard the recording of the phone conversation where she asked him to come over the next day, and they would spend the day together. He suggested that he could pretend to go out of state and be with her not just the day but also the night. She then told him that she would love screwing him in my bed. It would complete his status as a cuck, she said, and then the two of them had a good laugh about it. I called up Samantha from my mobile as I left the house for office and asked her to meet me at a restaurant not too far from where she had her practice set up. She was a budding plastic surgeon and had quite a practice, someone so young. She was just 28 and barely out of med school, but her miraculous operation of a burn patient had been headlining news, and now she had a roaring practice for those who wanted to look flawless. When Samantha met me later that day, I told her what I knew and she was very calm about it all. She did not cry or even get angry. She just had a sad look in her eyes. She asked me what I intended to do next, and I told her about the recording and the plans that her husband and the love of my life had made. She said that since she would be opting for a divorce, the recordings would come in very handy. She, however, asked me if there was a need to humiliate them in public. I chose not to reply. I had no justification. I just had the urge. When I got home from the trip, I was welcomed with the warmth and affection that I deserved. I knew it was an act. I did not make any efforts to get physically close to her. It was almost revolting to even touch her. I had to do something about it. If I did not sleep with her in the same bed, she would ask questions, and I might lose my composure and let her have it. I did not intend to give in so easily. I told her that I had a lot of work to finish as I was looking forward to getting the job I carried from client site finished up before weekend. I told her it might even result in a promotion and it would make the rest of life a lot easier. She bought that, and I sat down on my computer with my headphones on and stared to put together a show for the people that were going the premiere of the video clip that I had collected. It had everything good sex tape could have. I suddenly find my eyes wet. I was crying. As I looked at the diamond ring I bought for her, I was feeling a sudden loss of faith. It was almost someone had ripped my heart out, and all that was left was an empty cage of ribs with a hollowness that was all-engulfing. I walked to the bedroom and looked at her and cried some more. Have you ever seen a grown man cry? You might someday, and it will not be a very pretty sight, I must assure you. It takes a lot of courage for a man to admit that he is hurting. I had found that courage, and I was just wondering if I could find enough courage in me to forgive her and not to go through with this sordid plan of mine. I did not have the courage to ask myself this question. Not tonight. Certainly not tonight. The next morning, I told Kathy that I was going to stay home all week, as I have to finish paperwork on the new client. She took it well. I also asked her to take a few days off and spend some time with me. I wanted her to know what she was going to miss in the years to come. I wanted her to taste luxuries that she had never known. I wanted her to know what she was throwing away. Every time that she would think back on our days together, the only question I wanted her to ask was, how could I be so stupid? Do you love me? This question took me by surprise. I had no idea what to say, but then I did say something smart. I love you more today than I will ever love you for the rest of my life. She narrowed her eyes and said, Now, what is that supposed to mean? It's deep, baby. Real deep, I said in an almost comical tone. I just wanted this conversation to end. I took her shopping that day and spent a lot of money getting her a lot of expensive dresses. I picked one out for her to wear on the weekend party. It almost went close to a bridal dress. I could see she was pleasantly surprised. Then I took her to the most exclusive restaurants in town. I could see how excited Kathy was to come out to a place like this. I did take her out frequently, but mostly it was to places we would meet friends. The next step was to let her know what she could have had. Now, I am a man of modest habits and I do not spend much. In fact, I was able to save a little from what I made working. This also meant that I never touched a penny that I made from my business. Although Kathy knew I was loaded, she had no idea how much. I wanted her to get the idea. The next morning, I left my bank statement lying on the desk as I went to take a bath. It was a place I was sure she would find it. Later in the day, I heard a recording of her talking to one of her friends. Becca, you are going to flip out when you hear how much my darling Ben has just in his savings account. Then she gave her an obscene amount. No kidding. I had no idea the stakes were so high when I went around screwing with Roger. I am going to end all my association with Roger till the time I am safely married to Ben. She planned to end all her associations, for the time being. I was planning differently. I called up Roger in the evening and asked him to meet me at a small diner near his office. We had met on a few occasions when he had come to drop Samantha off to take care of me and had shared some small talk, but he was kind of surprised when I asked him to meet me. When I met him that day, I was almost on the verge of breaking every bone in his body. But I am a peaceful man, and I remember what my papa told me: anger finds its best ally in a gentleman. As we sat down, I asked him if he had any idea why I asked him to meet me. He said that he did not have the faintest of the idea, but his voice betrayed him. I knew he knew I knew. I just came out in the open and told him to stay away from Kathy, and to make sure that Kathy never finds out that we ever talked. I told him in detail what me and my basketball buddies, I lied, I do not play basketball, would do to him if I ever found out he has met or talked to Kathy again. He said that Kathy called him in the morning and told him that she wanted to have nothing to do with him. I knew she did call him, but her words were, I do not want to have anything to do with you till I am safely married to Ben. He was lying to my face. Well, he had been doing a lot worse behind my back, so I guess this was okay for now. I told him that if he did not keep his word, Samantha would also find out. That scared the hell out of him. When he left the diner, he was just about as confident about his marriage as I was about sharks falling out of the sky on me during a storm. I called Kathy up on her cell phone and asked her to meet me at the office of the real estate agent who had helped me look for my current apartment. When she got there, I was already deep in conversation with the estate agent about a villa a few miles out of town. We drove out there, and I really liked the property and thought that this would be a good investment to make. Before we left the property, I told the estate agent that my lawyer will be in touch with him about the purchase of the property and also that I might want to buy it in the name of wife. This was the first time I had ever mentioned about marriage or wife in front of Kathy. As we drove off, she asked me if we could afford the mortgage on the house. Bitch. She knew that I could buy the villa with hard cash any given day, and she was acting as if she was not sure if I could afford it. Well, this was a villa she was never going to step again into. Then I called Samantha from my phone and asked her if she could help Kathy buy some new shoes and designer dresses for our trip to France the next week. She was most glad to help. I told Kathy to spend as high as $10,000 and that she could charge it to her credit card and I would pay up later. That night she came home with some beautiful designer garments. I jokingly asked her if she had bought insurance for them. She just smiled and she looked genuinely happy. I could see how much it was going to hurt her. I spread out the dresses on the bed and asked her to get us some red wine to drink and celebrate tonight. When I was on my 5th glass, I accidentally spilled wine all over her dresses and ruined them. It was heartbreaking for me. Nah, it was not. I was enjoying every minute of it. Now, here was a maxed-out credit card that would keep her busy for the next year. It was Friday night, and I was not going to let the night end so easy. I finally spoke to her and told her that this amount was peanuts for me, and then showed her my bank statement when she acted as if she did not believe me. Then I took her out on the terrace and showed her the engagement ring that I had bought a few days ago. Then I told her all the dreams I had for her and me, 2 kids, a son and a daughter and a small villa on the outskirts of the town. I told her that I had waited all my life to feel completely in love, and then I told her about the good times that we had together. I took her back to the day when I told her for the first time that I loved her. I told her that I loved the way that she looked and smelled on that day. I could recall the dress she was wearing, the glint in her eyes, and it hurt me a little as I thought how little she thought of these things. I took her inside and switched on the music system as I sat down next to her holding her in my arms for one last time. At that time I knew I was not going to walk out of this mess unhurt. I was going hurt as much as I was going to hurt her. The only good thing was that since I was already hurting there was nothing new that was going to happen to me tomorrow at the party but for her. It would be the first day of the rest of her life. I said that it was getting late, and we had a big day ahead of us. We needed to sleep a little. The next morning, I woke up early and called the catering company and made sure that everything was set. I then checked my answering machine for any message from people that were not going to make it. There was one from Samantha that said that she was not sure she and her husband would be able to come, but she would give us a clear picture in the evening. The message was addressed to Kathy, so I told her that Samantha had called and left a message. Then I asked if she could persuade Samantha to turn up with her husband because I really liked her and would like her to be present in the evening. I heard her call up Samantha and ask her to make sure that they did turn up. Samantha handed the phone to Roger, who at first agreed that he could not come, but at last relented into coming. As the evening approached, the caterers came, and the whole house was abuzz with activity. I did not even realize when our first guest arrived. When her parents came in, I walked up to them and thanked them for coming in. Mike came with Rose and Samantha arrived with Roger. I was ready to rock and roll. Mike asked everybody to gather around as I had some important to say. I stood up and started to speak. Tonight I have called up all of you. Some who I love, some who Kathy loves, and a few that we both love. It is the last day that Kathy and I are spending as girlfriend and boyfriend. Kathy was still smiling. I am going to play a small video clip over here and let you decide if what I feel is right. Every time that I look at Kathy, I feel deep in my heart that I am right. At this cue, Mike dimmed the light, and Rose started the video clip that was projected on the living room wall. I walked towards Mike and Rose and stood on the opposite side of the room from where Kathy was sitting. Rose hugged me tight, and Mike put his arms across my shoulder. I just then saw Samantha walk towards us. She needed the support as well. I whispered to Rose to be with Samantha, and she let go of me to hold Samantha's hand. The video started. It was all about the days that we had spent together. I had tears in my eyes and I was shaking. I knew what was coming next. Kathy stopped smiling. The image on the screen was that of her talking on the phone, and the voiceover was still mine say, "I love to watch her so much that I even had cameras all over the house, so that I could see her doing sweet nothings on TV when she was not around. I had voice recorders all over the house, so that I could hear her breath on my music system when she was not around. These were my home videos." Then her voice came over. "I am going to marry Ben, and nothing is going to stop me." This sentence was edited from a phone conversation that she had with Becca. Then the video of her talking on the phone faded away, and faded in another video of her undressing and of Roger sitting on her bed in her bedroom. There was a large thump in the semi-darkness, and just then Mike switched on the lights and Rose stopped the video. I walked calmly into the center of the room and said, "For all who want to see this video fully, Please visit me later. I plan on having private viewings of these videos every weekend till people are bored of it and I have no viewers. Then I turned my attention to the direction where the loud thump came from. Her father was lying on the floor with no one around. It was about then that the first person spoke. It was her mother. Please someone have a look at my husband. He seems to have had a heart attack. She was crying. I felt bad. They were not evil. But then we all pay for what our children do, don't we? I rushed to his side and Samantha was quick to get to his assistance. Kathy was still sitting in the chair and had not uttered a word. Roger had a defeated look on his face and was standing in a corner facing the wall. The party soon broke up. Left in the room were Kathy, Mike, Rose and I. Mike said they would step out of the room if we wanted to talk alone. I told them that would not be necessary. I sat down on the couch and asked Rose if she would kindly fix me a drink. Then I turned to Kathy and spoke to her for the first time in the whole evening. So, I guess this is goodbye then. She looked at me and for the first time a tear appeared in her eyes. I am so sorry. I broke her in the middle and started speaking. It was never meant to happen. It just happened and I did not know how to stop. Swear to God I never meant to hurt you. I love you, and this was nothing but a physical thing that meant nothing. I have no feelings for Roger. I need you. Can we find some way to work this out? She could not believe what she was seeing. I was being hurtful and rash, something that she would never expect me to be. I was the sissy, the cuck. I said, if this is not what you were going to say, please complete what you started. But if this is what you were going to say, I have said it and it means nothing to me. She just sat there sobbing. Rose had not gone fix a drink. She had gone to pack up Kathy's bag. As she came out with her bag, Kathy realized what was going on. She was going to get thrown out of the house. She had just seen her father being taken away to a hospital, so she knew for sure that she did not have her parents' place to go. Becca had left the room in a hurry, and I was sure that she would not like to keep her company, as it would cast a doubt on her character as well. So that was another place she could not go. I had carefully snapped her debit card earlier in the evening and removed all but $13 from her purse. Her credit card was maxed out, and she did not have a car anymore. It did not look all that good to me, but then she was still to find out about the debit card and the missing money from her purse. She looked at me and pleaded, "You are not going to throw me out like this. Doesn't our time together mean anything to you? Did it mean anything to you when you went to bed with that a-hole?" I asked. She just sat there saying nothing. "I would love to have thrown you on the streets tonight, but that is not going to happen. Is it?" She looked at me. "You are not going to throw me out on the streets?" "I am going to throw you out on the street because I am sure when he screwed you, he must have left some stink in there." I spat venomously. Mike walked up to me and said, "Ben, you are a better person than this." Kathy looked at him and pleaded, "Mike, please don't let him do this to me." Mike looked at her and spoke to me again. "You are a better person than this. You should not speak in such manner to anyone. If you're going to throw her out of the house, do it quickly. Don't waste our time. She is not worth looking at anyways." I looked at him. He was toying with her. His words were the final nail in the coffin for Kathy. She knew that no one was going to speak for her. I had already taken her keys to the house from her purse earlier in the evening along with her car keys. Now all I had to do was walk her out the door and lock the door behind her. That is precisely what I did. That was the last time I saw Kathy or heard from her. Roger got divorced and is now paying alimony to his already successful ex-wife. I did date Samantha for some time, but nothing went ahead. I guess it will take some time for me to find the love of my life. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'm Ted, a 45-year-old man. In 2020, I tragically lost my partner, Diana, to COVID-19. A common friend introduced me to Kathy, a 38-year-old woman who had previously been married and divorced due to a difficult relationship with her ex-husband, who was described as an alcoholic and abusive. Relying on my friend's advice, I began dating Kathy. However, as time passed, I started to notice significant differences in our political views. While I hold traditional values when it comes to family, life, and gender politics, Kathy leans strongly towards the left. Before I could get married, my friend who introduced me to Kathy suggested that I ask for a prenup agreement before we get married, and I was fine with it. Gave me a feeling of a movie star. I laughed at the idea, but anyways, not that it would impact my life. We decided to get married after just 3 months of dating. Kathy was quite dedicated to following left-wing politicians and held some strong political views. While she occasionally tried to sway me to her side, my commitment to my traditional family values kept me grounded. We engaged in friendly debates on various political topics from time to time, and in these discussions, I often found that she struggled to respond when I presented factual arguments. Fortunately, our love life remained relatively unaffected by her political leanings, allowing us to focus on the aspects of our relationship that we shared. I was employed as a manager in a software company, which provided me with a steady and comfortable income. Kathy, however, came from a more modest background and made the choice to stay at home and manage the household. On occasion, I would return home to find Kathy engrossed in watching news debates, and it wasn't unusual for her to greet me with angry and unwelcome comments stemming from her frustration with the world. These instances added another layer of complexity to our relationship, as our differing political views and her emotional reactions to world events created tension in our household. As 2 more years passed, I believed that we were living our lives and enjoying marital bliss. However, there were significant developments that I failed to mention. Kathy's left-leaning political views had only intensified over time. She became a strong advocate for women's liberation and empowerment. I suggested to Kathy that she could consider working to prove herself and contribute financially, but her response surprised me. She firmly believed that working and taking care of the household was my responsibility. While I could understand her perspective, I couldn't help but notice the shift from advocating empowerment and gender equality to embracing more traditional gender roles, which happened rather quickly. It appears that there were more changes in Kathy's behavior over time. She began spending a lot of time on her phone, engaging with various social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, which seemed to consume her entire day. On certain occasions, I would come home to find that dinner hadn't been prepared, and when I inquired about it, she simply stated that she was busy. I was left puzzled, as cooking was one of her responsibilities. That night, Kathy did engage in an intimate encounter with me, but it felt notably different from our usual interactions. She displayed a more dominating attitude, which was a significant departure from our usual dynamics. Coming home early one day, I was surprised to find my wife engaged in an enthusiastic conversation with our single, gym-loving 27-year-old neighbor. As soon as she saw me, she abruptly ended their discussion and hurried over to me, greeting me with a passionate, full-blown French kiss, complete with the whole tongue thing. It was entirely unexpected, and it felt like she wanted our neighbor to witness the display. This left me feeling both surprised and concerned about the message she might have been trying to convey. It was a departure from her usual behavior. I was taken aback by the passionate kiss and my wife's reaction when I questioned her about it. Her response, a simple smile followed by a question if I didn't like it, left me speechless. I decided to change and process what had just happened. In the days that followed, I noticed more changes in her behavior. Kathy started working out and became significantly more active in our sex life, with a frequency I hadn't experienced before. Then, one morning while having my coffee, I noticed Kathy was still in bed, and her phone was left on the kitchen table. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up her phone, finding a video featuring a famous former adult movie actor offering tips for marriage.
Oh, we're comparing stats. Baby girl doesn't know that I am Tom Brady at this game. Married at 18, divorced at 21. Second marriage, married at 25, divorced at 28. Third engagement, engaged at 29, ended it at 30, but I kept the ring. I'm still keeping Tom Brady on his toes. We should not be afraid to leave these men. We are not stuck with these people. Marriage is not a sanctimonious thing. It is paperwork. It's something, it's a commitment you make to someone. But if you feel like you're not getting anything from that commitment and you're trying, you gotta go. You gotta go. You have to go. I know it's difficult to fill out paperwork and to make appointments and to do all of these things, but this is your fucking life. Do you want to be stuck with someone? Period. Do you want to be...
What would a woman who had her legs open for the world to see? Will suggest you get divorced. For heaven's sake, she has multiple failed marriages, and now she advises women to get divorced just like her. She has earned money in from her career in the corn industry. She has money from her multiple divorce settlements. What does a common woman, who just is a housewife or just works a normal job, has? Does she have the financial security as the Kron star? I was disgusted and wanted to talk to my wife. I decided to go to work and have this discussion with my wife tonight. So, I got dressed and left for work. In the office I could not work, and I wanted to quickly return home. So I asked my boss for a day off and quickly left. I reached home, and as I was walking towards my front door, I found it open and I walked in, and I could hear moans coming from my bedroom, and my heart started beating fast, and I was not sure what is going on. I walked towards my room and found my wife naked on top of the neighbor guy. I was shocked and stunned. I somehow gathered myself and managed to get my phone out to start filming their act. They were so involved that they did not notice my presence, and I walked out quickly. I rushed out of the house and went for a long drive, and kept driving till I reached the nearest beach. I stood there and let the wind wash my face. My tears had dried, and I was desperate to get my life sorted. After a few hours, I called my lawyer, and he asked me to come and meet him. I was fortunate to get an appointment the same day, and I shared the video with him. The lawyer assured me that adultery is a ground for divorce, and he would try and save as much money from being split as possible. I then told my lawyer that I do have a prenup. As per the prenup agreement, if I cheat on my wife, I would have to let go of 70% of all my assets. If she cheats, I would not give her anything. Well, I now started to thank my friend who suggested me to sign a prenup agreement. The lawyer asked me to cut all contacts with my wife and asked me to leave my house till she is evicted from my house. I discussed with my lawyer, and after some discussion, I sent her a message stating that I was going out of town for an emergency meeting and will not be able to be at home. I went to a local motel, and meanwhile my wife kept calling me and I kept ignoring her calls. In the meanwhile, my lawyer also hired a private investigator to do a background check for Kathy. What came out was nothing short of shocking. I knew she was previously divorced. I was told her previous husband was alcoholic and abusive. However, what came out that it was the other way around. She used to work as paid protester for the left politicians. She used to charge money to show up and protest for political reasons. Once her husband asked her to stop, she framed him of being an alcoholic. It turned out that the guy never drank alcohol. He was beaten up by Kathy, and once cops were called to stop her. They got divorced after she had busted his head open in one of their arguments. She robbed the guy dry and left him broken. I felt so lucky and relieved that I will be saving everything that I have worked for. After 5 days, I met the lawyer, and he introduced me to the famed private investigator. We decided to serve my wife that very day. He called the local police station and spoke to his friend, who agreed to help us. We drove to my house and again found my door open. We all walked inside and once again found my wife in action with the neighbor. This time I was not silent, called her name, and she was shocked to see 4 people standing in her bedroom watching her get pumped. She started shouting and hurled abuses and crying. She kept swinging between blaming and calling me names to saying how sorry she is and want forgiveness. The PI was filming all of this. The sheriff walked up and handed Kathy the divorce papers and said, "You have been served." I then broke my silence and asked Kathy to get dressed, and she has 2 hours to leave my house. She started shouting and said that I was abusive, and I have been abusive with her throughout the marriage. I kept quiet, and my lawyer then spoke up, asking her to connect with him in case she wants any communication with me. I asked the sheriff to help ensure that Kathy leaves my house. He asked Kathy to hurry up, and in case she has any complaints, she can connect with the local police. Kathy got dressed and packed her bags and walked into the neighbor's house. I slept in the guest room that night and next day sold my marital bed. I felt disgusted to use it anymore. I threw out some of Kathy's stuff in the garbage. I waited for the divorce proceedings to start. I got a call from my office asking me to go on a leave as there is a video going around where a woman is saying that I am an abusive man. I knew what is going on. Kathy wants to finish my reputation. If there is one thing a man loves apart from his family, it is his reputation. I was now going to fight back. A few days later, in the court, Kathy came up with all sorts of complaints that I used to physically assault her and torture her mentally. She stated that I hit her on multiple occasions, and once it was so bad that she had to be hospitalized. Kathy was once hospitalized. She did fall in the bathroom and was hospitalized. I was a bit afraid how this will be seen by the court. My lawyer was an expert with taking care of such tactics. He proved with my digital presence that I was 20 miles away from my wife when she fell and was hospitalized. He produced the 911 call that was made by Kathy when she fell. Also, brought the 911 respondents as witness, who confirmed that I was not present and confirmed that Kathy did not mention that she was assaulted by anyone. Kathy also accused me of mental torture and how I used to make her feel that she is from a modest background and never used to care for even her minimum requirements. My lawyers produced all the credit card statements where Kathy had been shopping for her minimum requirements. Kathy even accused me of cheating on her and even bringing other women in our marital bed. This was once again busted as every visitor is documented on camera when they enter our gated housing society. There was no such evidence that I ever brought any guest to our house. It was now my turn. My lawyer produced 2 video evidences where Kathy was on bed with the neighbor guy. On watching this, Kathy stated that it was I who asked her to sleep with the neighbor and I wanted to watch. The judge had enough and asked Kathy to talk when she is asked to. My lawyer then went on to produce the viral video where Kathy was accusing me of being an abusive husband. He requested that this video be stopped and Kathy apologized for propagating false narrative. The court took into account all the present evidences and stated that Kathy did cheat on me and asked her to take her video down and offer an unconditional apology. Kathy then again stood up and asked for alimony and part in the property that I hold. The judge quickly reminded her that is she speaking out of line and need to sit quietly. The judge then asked Kathy to come forward. She walked up and the judge told her that it is clear that she has cheated and there is no evidence against me. She was then directed by the court to make another post with an unconditional apology for me and also told her that she will not get any money from me as it was part of the prenup agreement that she will not get any money if she cheated. Kathy was stunned and started crying in the courtroom. She started shouting at everyone in the court that she is being victimized as she is a woman. When the judge asked her to be quiet, she screamed. Exactly like the weird leftist women who scream when they don't have anything logical to say. She was quickly taken into custody by the cops and taken out of the court. I was granted my divorce, and the judge empathized with me, stating that we have seen good men losing their livelihood because of women like Kathy. He stated that he was happy for me that I was able to get all the evidence to prove my innocence in Kathy's crimes. I thanked him, and then the court was closed. Everyone dispersed once it was over, and Kathy later returned to my neighbor's house. Next day, Kathy did post an apology as directed by the court, and the other video was taken down. The neighbor later walked up to me and apologized and asked for my help to get Kathy out of his house. He stated that it was all good as long as Kathy was not living with him. Now it is a nightmare. He also mentioned that Kathy is forcing him to marry her as she got divorced because of him. I asked him to contact my lawyer for a way out. I gave his number and walked away. The lawyer asked him get his house covered with cameras and not let Kathy know about it. He asked him to video document every interaction with Kathy. Over the next 3 days, he took Kathy out for vacation and gave the house to someone for covering every corner of his house with cameras and microphones. I did not interact a lot with the neighbor, just did not want to run into Kathy. A few days later, I heard screams and loud noises from the neighbor's house. I was worried and called 911. Cops arrived and I was shocked to see what had transpired. I saw that the neighbor guy was covered in blood and Kathy, who now had short hair dyed in blue, screaming that she is the victim, not the criminal. The cops were trying to handcuff her. She started fighting with the cops and even tried to run. She got tased and put in handcuffs. She was thrown in the cop car and taken to custody. I walked to the neighbor guy and asked him if he is okay. He hugged me and thanked me for the suggestion to connect with my lawyer. He later got restraining order against Kathy and cut all connections with her. I took him out for a drink and we really bonded well. He was a nice guy, just made a mistake for falling for Kathy. Well, I made the same mistake, so cannot blame him a lot. He introduced me to the gym, and now after a year I am a gym buff and we are good friends. So now I have a great job, great health and good friends. I do get a lot of attention from women. I am reluctant to get into a serious relationship as of now. Hopefully I will get into one someday. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.